Chapter 1385. Not long after Count Popovich was beheaded, the young Lady Doni, who had grown up with the father's good daughter, character, saw the scene and fainted due to the extreme grief. This girl was just an ordinary descendant of the ancients. She was healthy at most, but she was still a human. There were many ways to wake her up after she fainted. But here, no one suggested to wake the girl up. It was the true dragon of godly land who approached, picked up the girl with one hand, and placed her on the sofa. Long Shirua frowned and said after a moment of silence, "It seems that this beheaded guy is the noble who has been calling her name. Let's not wake her up yet." "Then, let's do as Ms. Long said." Luaccio nodded. Long Shirua glanced at Boss Luo's curved screen. Since she had figured out the reason for the conflict in the town, she didn't want to continue watching. The internal strife between the vampires was obviously not something that Kelowna's Shinryu cared about. She stayed here for other reasons. "Miss Long, when do you plan to leave?" Out of the blue, the club's servant girl suddenly asked with a smile. The true dragon of the divine land, who always felt that there were thousands of sharp blades hidden behind this smile, frowned and said, "This is not your place. Whether I stay or not doesn't seem to have much to do with you, does it?" Miss Maid said, "Don't you know, Ms. Long? He is past my—" She wanted to say master, but seeing that Maria was still here, she chuckled and said, "My boyfriend usually sleeps. It's not good for his health if he sleeps too late. I can't even break through the defense of this deadhead. It would be strange if he didn't have a good health. Even the former Yellow Emperor couldn't be compared to him." "Is that so? Then do as you please." Kelowna's Shinryu snorted. "I'm just waiting for someone. I'll leave when the person arrives. Don't worry." Long Shirua grabbed Doni under her armpit and glared at Boss Luo. Then, she lifted Golden Dragon and walked out of the living room. "Sister Long, where are you going?" "Smoking." Little Butterfly looked at both of them awkwardly. Finally, she hurriedly nodded in front of Boss Luo and followed Long Shirua out. In the living room, except for Boss Luo and his servant, Miss Witch was the only one left. Miss Witch felt that there was a lingering smell of gunpowder in the living room, so she started laughing out loud. "Speaking of which, the one who killed in the square must be that Norman we met, right?" Maria looked at Boss Luo and Miss Maid's expressions. "I thought he was just a bronze. I didn't expect him to be a king in the clan. We were lucky to escape from under his nose." Miss Maid smiled and said, "Miss Maria Hood, don't you know yet? This villa was arranged by the Mr. Norman you mentioned. He'll come back." Miss Witch was shocked. "What are we waiting for? Let's get out of here before he comes back." "Didn't I just say it?" Miss Maid said indifferently. "He needs to rest. Even if you want to do something, wait until he's rested." Looking at Master Rainbow Pansy in front of her, who looked like a qualified wife, Maria was completely speechless. This was the secret potion master that frightened the entire magician world. Then I'll wait." Maria sighed and said, "I was the one who brought the two of you to this place. I can't just leave by myself." In fact, the witch who had been replaced by Teresa had the ability to leave at this time. But if she left like this, it would be meaningless for her to go to the inhuman territory. Boss Luo suddenly said, "Just now, Miss Maria told me an interesting place. Let's help her." Miss Maid nodded quickly. She turned her palm, and a bottle of secret potion appeared in her palm. "This is a recovery potion, at most a 5-star potion. Let Miss Teresa drink it, and her body should be able to recover." Maria was stunned, and then her hands trembled as she took the potion from Miss Maid's hand. A 5-star recovery potion. Except for some special types of potions, the recovery potion as a recovery potion was more valuable than many 6-star potions, even though it was a 5-star potion. At this moment, Miss Witch's eyes seemed to burst out dazzling light as if she was holding gold in her hands. She loved the potion bottle so much that she couldn't put it down. "But isn't it too expensive?" Maria took a deep breath and stuffed the bottle into her neckline. Then she said, "How can I accept this?" "Just take it as a reward for the information you provided me." Boss Luo smiled faintly. "Don't worry about it. Besides, tonight, as long as Miss Maria doesn't leave this villa, there shouldn't be any danger." Wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow? Maria blinked her eyes. Boss Luo smiled and said, tomorrow will be a new beginning. Isn't that the saying? Haha, thank you for the encouragement. Mary shrugged. Then, Miss Maria, please do it yourself. After saying that, Boss Luo got up, turned off the curved screen, and left the living room accompanied by Miss Maid. This time, Maria didn't intend to ask them to stay. Anyway, she saw that the guys here, except for the girl whose breasts were slightly bigger than hers, were much stronger than her. These guys weren't afraid, so she didn't seem to have anything to be afraid of. Thus, Maria took out the 5-star recovery potion from the general's mouth. She wiped the bottle while exhaling and decided to just spend the night in the living room. But then again, Miss Witch muttered to herself, why is this little brother magician so interested in the ancient tomb of the pharaoh? Could it be that ring is really special? She had an idea and then took out the backup messenger from her collar. Then she bent over the table and quickly wrote something and then stuffed it into the messenger. Finally, she released the messenger. After leaving the living room, the true dragon of the divine land found a place, the utility room under the stairs. He tied the golden dragon up again, knocked it half dead, and threw it into the utility room. After that, he began to wander around the villa again. After a while, she stopped in one of the rooms and put the girl Dooni on the bed. Seeing this, the little butterfly monster quickly covered the girl with a quilt. That girl called Mina, she really disappeared. Long Shirwa frowned and said, I walked around but didn't feel her presence. She should have completely left the villa. Miss Mina? Luo Dance asked curiously. Is there any problem with her? Problem? Long Shirwa shook her head and said, there is a big problem. Look at this girl. Does she look like an ordinary 14 or 15 years old human? She looks like a prostitute. If she dresses up more old-fashioned, I will believe that she is an experienced procuress. Luo Dance said, well, shall we go and ask the boss? He must know. Okay. Kelowna Shinryu nodded abruptly. The little butterfly monster, who originally thought that Sister Long would be the same as usual and scold the profiteer the moment she opened her mouth, was stunned for a moment. Can I? Kelowna Shinryu pondered and said, well, we can ask, but we can't ask in front of that scheming girl. We have to ask secretly. The true dragon of the godly land suddenly put his hands on the little butterfly's shoulders and looked at her seriously. Pian Xian, let me ask you, am I good to you? Well, why are you hesitating? Very good. Sister Long is very good to me. Kelowna Shinryu rolled his eyes. Well, you can eat whatever you like. I won't say anything about you anymore. But you have to do one thing for me. Kelowna Shinryu pulled the little butterfly monster's ears and whispered something. The little butterfly monster blinked her eyes and kept blinking. I've asked for help. I don't believe I can't win. I'm not afraid. At this moment, Kelowna Shinryu thought so. At this moment, Shinryu and the little butterfly monster had completely forgotten about the first pagoda master of the association who had come with them and hadn't returned yet. For Hui Yao, time had never felt so long. He had once immersed himself in the spiritual world for 3 whole months because he was thinking about the mystery of magic, but he was never as tired as he was now. His head felt like it was going to explode at any time. Fortunately, his understanding of magic was like a sieve with thousands of holes, but at least it was blocked. He didn't completely lose the power of magic and had to start all over again. But where's this place? His memory only stopped at the moment when he entered the bottom of the Lost Rift and saw a huge area covered in thick fog. Obviously, everything here was completely different from the gloomy, dark, and dangerous bottom of the Lost Rift. The sun, wind, clouds, and fields. The smoke from the kitchen, the village, the sound of children playing, and the fresh air. It was just like the Peach Garden Village recorded in the ancient text. The tranquility and peace that filled him all the time made his body and mind feel comfortable. The pain of the splitting headache seemed to have lessened a little because of this. You seem to be fine now. A voice entered Hui Yao's ears. He turned around and saw an extraordinarily handsome young man walking in. He even looked a little demonic. Furthermore, there was something attached to the young man's shoulder. It was a vengeful spirit, Hui Yao recognized the thing behind the young man with just a glance. You saved me? Hui Yao asked with a serious expression. The young man smiled. Strictly speaking, it should be the one who saved you. When it was playing, it found you unconscious outside. Then it brought you to me. After saying that, the young man slowly walked closer and said, Fortunately, I brought you here in time. If it was any later, I'm afraid your spirit would have completely collapsed. The master of the Hui Yao Tower could not help but smile bitterly. It seemed like it was not the effort he put in before he fainted that worked. It was because he received help that he survived the crisis safely. The young man said, You should be walking on the path of magic, right? However, you haven't mastered the few basic rules of magic in this subworld yet. It's not very wise of you to take the risk and try to integrate yourself with the other world. You should reach the limit of what you can achieve in this world before you start to think about taking the next step. It'll be safer. Hui Yao's heart was filled with disgust. He opened his mouth and said absent-mindedly, Who are you? The young man shook his head. I don't know who I am either, but if you don't mind, you can call me by my previous name, Kane. Hui Yao's expression suddenly changed. He said in disbelief, You're the original body of the Lost Fong? The origin of all vampires. Kane? He suddenly understood that he had entered the inner part of the thick fog. The young man shook his head and said, It's not wrong to say that I'm the original body of the Lost Fong in another sense. However, I'm not the origin of vampires. The birth of vampires in this world has nothing to do with Kane. Since you try to integrate yourself with the other worlds, you should be able to understand the unification of the legends. I still don't quite understand. Hui Yao took a deep breath at this time. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, If you're not stingy to discuss more with me, I think I'll be very grateful. The young man, Kane, looked at Hui Yao and seemed to be thinking about something. After a while, he said, You seem to be born with a strong desire for knowledge. From your eyes, I can see the exploration and desire for endless knowledge and truth. What do you mean, sir? Kane said indifferently, If you're willing to stay, then stay. I can tell you some of the things that I know about the multiple worlds. After all, according to your current situation, it won't be long before you can personally come in contact with a small part of them. Only a small part of them? Hui Yao took a deep breath. However, he was not discouraged. He used to be called a stupid student, but he never gave up on the exploration of magic. If he could learn more about the truth of the world, then in that case, would it bring him an opportunity to completely restore the core system of the Greek divine kingdom? As for his teacher, it should not be a problem, right? Anyway, there was nothing in this world that could baffle his teacher. Then, he might as well stay here for a while. Chapter 1386. A multifaceted era. The explorers in space and time. The primordial world. The endless journey. Kane was simply narrating some things, and Hui Yao was completely mesmerized as he listened to it. He was completely attracted by everything in the big world outside of this huge world. You're saying that once we break the shackles of the world, we'll feel some kind of call and search for it? Hui Yao frowned and asked subconsciously, So, any individual who reaches this standard will definitely feel the call. Many individuals will have the same doubts as you when they first feel the call. Kane thought for a while and said, Is there a special individual who won't feel the call? But at least during the long exploration process, the explorers who have come into contact with each other have shown that this is the case. So it's inevitable. Hui Yao could not help but ponder. Kane said again, But we can't use inevitability to define this matter, because we can't exhaust all the individuals who have reached this standard. Everything is possible. So, there may be individuals who won't feel the call. It won't be contradictory. Hui Yao walked back and forth in the house. Suddenly, he said, Most of you, have you ever considered that the call might be caused by someone behind it? After all, what is the primordial one? Why we have to find a primordial one? Don't you think it's incredible? There are so many different worlds, so many individuals who have surpassed the limit that were born in so many different worlds will all feel the same call. Kane said calmly, Because you're still lacking and haven't really reached this step, it's hard for you to understand this point. However, once you've taken this step, all your doubts will be solved. Even if I were to describe more to you now, I can't really convey the urgency to you. But the doubts you have about the call are the same as most of the explorers. Hui Yao could not help but let out a bitter laugh. What a terrible answer. This reminds me of the so-called experienced people. They always use such a tone. But this is indeed something that can't be helped. I can experience it. No matter how I think and simulate according to your conditions, there's always something missing. After a short pause, Hui Yao continued to ask, just now you mentioned the legendary unification. How did you do it? Kane said, there are many ways to do this, but generally speaking, there are two methods that are more popular and more fixed. I'd like to hear the details. Hui Yao suddenly became serious. Kane said, first of all, you need to be clear about one thing, and that is the difference between Nirvana-level experts. In fact, transcendents were a very large category. It included all individuals who had broken through the limits of the original world. In other words, its bottom line was an individual that had broken the limits of the original world. But on the other hand, it didn't have an upper limit. This was because for those who transcended time and space, pure power was meaningless. They could absorb a large amount of power from the void at any time. Yep, for example, if you were used to using magic, then you would be able to obtain an endless supply of magic from the void at any time. As long as you can maintain your spirit, then theoretically, you could never stop using all the magic that you know. Hui Yao was stunned. The fact that transcendence had endless power reminded him of his own teacher, Shinryu. As long as she stood on the land of Kelowna, she would have an immortal body. Similarly, her power would be constantly replenished. If both transcendents couldn't exhaust each other's power to determine the winner, then if there was a fight between the two transcendents, wouldn't there be no result? Hui Yao suddenly frowned. You've neglected one point. Kane said indifferently. Kane said calmly, I've already told you. With this kind of power, you can continuously use all the magic spells you know. All the magic that I know. Hui Yao paused and seemed to be deep in thought. Do you understand now? Kane nodded. This individual who was close to that standard had a rather agile mind. He was a smart little fellow. What determines the outcome of a battle between transcendents is the different amount of knowledge that each of them possesses. Hui Yao suddenly raised his head. The party with more knowledge might not necessarily win the battle, but it would definitely have the upper hand. Yes, you can understand it that way, although it's not comprehensive. Kane nodded. However, the more worlds one explores, the stronger the transcendence will become. Hui Yao suddenly had an epiphany and said, through the other self in the multidimensional world, one can quickly grasp the knowledge of the other world. He lowered his head and walked faster and faster in the house. The other self has been living in the other world and has fully understood most of the things in the other world. It's equivalent to a fully ripe fruit. But how should I pluck it? Overlap. Overlap? No, it's not enough to just overlap. Memory sharing? But will the two sides be equal? Kane looked at this young human in surprise. He didn't know if he had realized all these in such a short period of time, or if he had thought of it because of some kind of revelation. He slowly said, these are the two mainstream methods of the unification of legends that I want to talk about next. One of them is the most known method used by the transcendents. At the same time, it's also the most convenient method to kill the other self in the other world. Kill the other self? Hui Yao was shocked. Kane said expressionlessly, every other self in the other world is independent, just like how you're unique in this world. There won't be a second you. There won't be two selves in the world. So, when you kill the other self in the other world, you'll automatically obtain all the memories and knowledge of the other self in the other world. You'll also be recognized by the other world because you're yourself. Hui Yao just frowned and didn't ask about the details of this method. He just made a note of it and then asked, what's the other mainstream method? Let each other self in the other world break the limit of the world on their own. Kane said, once the other self in the other world breaks the limit of the world, it'll automatically merge with another ultimate individual. However, there's a problem with this method. It's impossible to determine which one of them will be left behind. Moreover, This method is relatively slow because the chances of breaking the limit of the world are different from the other self in the other world. In fact, most of them will never be able to break the limit. Since there are so many shortcomings, there must be some advantages to choosing this method, right? Hui Yao's eyes narrowed. Cain said, "This argument has always existed, but it's never been proven. The only thing that's known is that among the transcendents who use the second method to achieve the unification of legends, there are more people who can produce the pseudo-eternal body in the end." Pseudo-eternal body. According to the cognition of this world, Cain thought for a while and said, "It's probably the same as the gods in your understanding, the true God." "You too?" Hui Yao suddenly asked. "In this world, there are many legends about Cain." Cain said calmly, "The previous Cain's method of becoming a pseudo-eternal body is a little different. You don't have to use it as a reference. That means, other than the mainstream method, there are still other ways to bypass the unification of legends and achieve the so-called pseudo-eternal body stage. Am I right?" Hui Yao's eyes flashed with more desire for knowledge. "However, this time," Cain said calmly, "however, I don't suggest that you try this method in the future. At the same time, I don't intend to reveal this to you." "Oh, sir." Hui Yao was stunned. He shook his head and said, "The feeling you give me is that you don't seem like a wise man who has experienced many worlds." Cain said, "Like what?" Hui Yao thought for a while and said, "More like some kind of machine." Cain was not angry. He just nodded. "I think you'll need some time to digest this information. Besides, the amount of information in your mind is still very chaotic. You'll need more time to sort it out. Otherwise, I'm afraid your original understanding will be overturned again." Hui Yao could only frown. He knew that this was the end of the conversation. However, Cain did not intend to chase him away. "I'll come back after 3 hours." Cain left these words. Hui Yao, sorting out so many chaotic things in 3 hours? It's impossible to do that, right? Cain had already left quietly. Hui Yao sighed slowly. Although this mysterious man in front of him called himself Cain, he could not completely trust him. Besides, he also said something about the other world. This attack wasn't any weaker than Yari's spiritual attack. But Hui Yao could not help but mumble to himself, "The gods in our world. Could it be that they also came from the other world?" Farm. A figure was quietly shuttling through the streets of the town. The direction was number 7 dormitory. This was Busby, who had left his temporary office. At this time, he could finally free himself from his official duties. He planned to secretly visit his sister, Mina, in number 7 dormitory. However, when he was about to reach number 7 dormitory, he discovered something strange that made him stop in his tracks. It was a very faint smell of blood. It was not the smell of human blood, but the smell of blood left behind by vampires. It came from a building on the road. It was a church. Of course, the church would not consecrate anything about him. The existence of this church was purely because of the preferences of some nobles. In order to obtain the blood of the priestess of purity, Busby frowned and entered the building in a flash. Soon, he found the source of the smell of blood. A black flame that was about to burn out appeared in front of him at this moment. There were traces of a light fight in the surroundings. The flame that was about to extinguish was burning a corner of a uniform. Beside it were 2 standard weapons of the patrol team members. Looking at the scene in front of him, Busby could not help but frown. Then he felt something and raised his head abruptly. He saw a figure standing on the flower window above the church. The figure was wearing a black robe and did not look like a strong person. He tried to see the other person's appearance, but what he saw shocked him. It was a face that was deathly pale, and at the same time, half of it was covered in black flames. Those eyes even contained a fury that moved even him. However, the other person's expression was so calm. It was as calm as the surface of the sea without wind. Busby glanced at it and suddenly waved his arm. 3 light swords with blood-red light pierced toward the figure above. However, the moment these 3 blood-colored swords were about to hit their target, they actually started burning black flames. "Why did you kill them?" Busby asked with a frown. However, the figure on the flower window sneered and whispered in a cold voice, I didn't expect to meet a traitor so soon. What? Busby was startled. The figure on the flower window sneered. After becoming a vampire, you forgot so soon. Woman? With a whoosh, Busby unfolded his wings. However, the figure in front of the flower window waved his hand, and a huge black fire tornado rushed toward Busby. He calmly dodged it, but the black fire tornado was very agile and exploded into dozens of fire tornadoes, covering almost all the space he could dodge. Busby was shocked and subconsciously closed his huge bat wings, blocking the exploding flames outside his body. A kind of bone-piercing pain caused the usually reserved him to have no choice but to reveal a pained expression. He let out a muffled groan, and his wings spread out, extinguishing the flames that covered them. However, the mysterious figure in front of the flower window had disappeared. I'll take your life last, traitor. Only this sentence echoed in the church. Busby slowly let out a sigh and landed. He looked at his wings, only to see that they had already become a bloody mess with thousands of holes. The power of the black flames was so horrifying that he had only touched them a little. Suddenly, Busby's expression changed. There were still flames in the holes of his wings that hadn't been put out and were still burning. The flames were growing crazily. Busby gritted his teeth and grabbed the roots of his wings with both hands. He growled in a low voice and tore his wings apart. Hwah! Hwah! The torn wings were tossed into the air and then engulfed by the black flames. Busby's face was pale, and the two huge wounds on his back were dripping with blood. Looking at the ashes that fell from the flames, his heart was filled with shock. Chapter 1387. Meow walked quickly on the streets of the town. She had a very clear goal. The black flame on her cheeks flickered as if it was some kind of reminder. She couldn't help but slow down. Her cold eyes were sizing up a few vampires who were patrolling at night. They were probably not members of the patrol team, but the vampires who were supervising the farm. Their main job was to prevent the crops from quietly moving at night. A sense of hunger arose spontaneously. Meow felt as if there was a pair of big hands behind her that were controlling her body, making her step towards the vampires. The black flame gave her a very strong power, but this power couldn't be maintained for long. It was more like a special weapon, and the targets of her revenge, the vampires, were the source of energy for this weapon. She needed to continuously use the black flames to burn the vampires and devour their souls in order to provide the energy for the black flames to be used. Apart from that, she couldn't use this flame to devour other souls. It was a very strict restriction, but because of the strong restriction, the power of the flame was also strong. It allowed her, an ordinary descendant of the ancients, to have the ability to easily destroy vampires. She approached them like a ghost. When the black flame suddenly burned behind them, they didn't even have time to react. They didn't even leave behind a word. All that was left was a pile of ashes. As if it had eaten its fill, the black flames once again burned steadily on Meow's cheeks, blooming with a faint grayish light. Power filled her body again. Without any hesitation, Meow arrived at the first destination of this trip at the fastest speed, the place where her companions were locked up. A low and deep voice that seemed to carry a bit of pain could be heard continuously. In the dungeon, many people who were trapped here raised their heads one after another. Their appearances were truly too miserable. The wounds on their bodies were like a crisscrossing spider web. The physical torture was still considered light, because there were already some who couldn't hold on and had completely collapsed. They were alive, but they didn't react at all as the vampires tortured them. The leader's name was David. He was once kidnapped by a pure-blood hunter from another clan's farm. After a few rounds, he finally escaped from a lower-level vampire noble who bought him. He knew the tragic fate of all the crops. He was determined to end the vampires' enslavement of the ancients. Soon, David found companions with the same goal. They were humans who escaped from the farms earlier than him. They began to quietly sneak back into the farms in an organized manner, spreading the idea of freedom to the children in the farms. They were like viruses in the eyes of the vampires, destroying the crops at a terrifying speed. Perhaps they were greedy. More than half a month ago, David planned a large-scale escape, but their continuous success seemed to have made them forget the huge natural difference between normal humans and vampires. Even so, David glared at the servant of the vampire who was dozing off outside the cage. Even so, a human would not be able to win against such a servant in a direct confrontation, let alone now that he was riddled with scars. Unwilling, 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 unwilling. Bright red blood flowed out of his eyes as he opened them. His lips had been bitten to the point of bleeding, but other than the abrasions on his wrists caused by excessive force, he did not manage to break free from the shackles. "It's my fault." David closed his eyes in pain. He didn't even dare to look at his dying companions who were also tortured. Then, a black flame suddenly ignited on the servant's body. In the eyes of all the Revolutionary Army trapped here, as they called themselves, the guard who was engulfed by flames couldn't even make a sound at this moment. It simply fell to the ground and rolled around crazily. Then it suddenly stopped moving and turned into ashes. The axle of the dungeon door slowly opened, and at this moment there was a slight biting sound. A figure in a black robe slowly walked into the dungeon. The person in the black robe. There was a black flame on the person's face, blocking everyone's sight. They could only see that the person slowly stretched out his hand at this moment. The shackles on David and his companions were instantly incinerated. They looked at the scene in disbelief. Their own side had already escaped. "Hurry up and leave this place. The guards outside have been killed by me." "You are?" David couldn't help but be startled. He quickly walked a few steps and hurriedly walked to the front of the black-robed person. The black-robed person, she just silently took 2 steps back and said again, "Leave this place." David was extremely surprised, but he knew that this was indeed not the time to waste. He quickly made a judgment and let the revolutionaries' companions support each other and leave this dungeon. The mysterious and powerful black-robed person walked in front of them all the way. As she said, they didn't see any clan guards on the way. Soon, they arrived at the edge of the farm without any danger. There's still 5 hours before dawn. She looked at these wounded revolutionaries. Only vampires will reduce the range of their activities. You'd better find a place to hide. Do you see that wall? On the other side of the wall is the mating farm. It will be safer for you to hide there. The management there is not as strict as here. As she said, she directly turned around and was about to enter the town again. David hurriedly walked in front of her and said quickly, "Meow, meow. You are Meow, meow, right? I recognize your voice. What exactly happened? Why are you here?" She couldn't help but stop, but didn't turn back. "Let's go. What happens next has nothing to do with you." David couldn't help but be startled. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. He said anxiously, "Meow, meow. What happened? Where's Aziz? Didn't he escape with you?" "Don't touch me." He didn't expect her to react so violently at this moment. She waved her hand, and there was a faint black flame flowing. David's whole body was hit and flew out. He fell directly to the ground and spat out a mouthful of pus and blood. David coughed and finally got up with the help of his companions. But everyone was looking at her in surprise. "If you don't want to die, leave immediately." After she said this sentence coldly, she turned around and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The group of Revolutionary Army that was rescued was at a loss at this time. Is she really Meow Meow? Why do I feel like she has changed into another person? Yes, Meow Meow has always been very gentle. "David, what should we do now?" David took a few deep breaths, then gritted his teeth, put his finger in his mouth, and then broke one of his teeth. There seemed to be something hidden in the tooth. The last one. David thought in his heart. It was a small pill. David swallowed the pill that was hidden in his teeth. He closed his eyes, and the injuries on his body began to recover rapidly. He looked at his companions and said, "In addition to Meow Meow and Aziz, there are 2 other companions who have escaped. They are probably still hiding in the farm now. I have to go and help them. You guys go to the mating farm first and wait for me. After dawn, if I don't meet up with you, leave immediately. Ignore them." "David, this operation has failed. We have lost contact with the leader for more than half of the time, David said in a low voice. But failure is not terrible, because the enemy we face is originally 100 times, 1,000 times more powerful than us. Killing any one of us is so insignificant in the eyes of the vampires. But to us, killing a vampire is a great victory. Even if we are weak, there will be a day when we will use our lowly hands to send them to eternal damnation with our own hands. We will use this weak body that has never been in their eyes to complete the real resistance and liberate all our companions. The fire of darkness will eventually be extinguished, and the light of dawn will always be bright. What you need to do is not to stop me, but to safely evacuate so that I don't have any worries. You be careful. His companions came forward one by one and gave David a hug. When his companions had disappeared in the night, David slowly breathed a sigh of relief, then pulled himself together and sneaked into the town again. Listen, you first do this, then do this, then do this, and finally do this. Do you understand? Sister Long's words kept replaying in her mind. Like reciting a book, the little butterfly monster was trying to simulate Kelowna's plan to Shinryu. In the corridor of the villa, she was looking for Miss Maid. At this time, the little butterfly monster suddenly thought of a problem. If Sister Yu Yi is not alone, but with the boss, how do we continue? And do we really have to do this? It's too late to go back and ask now. While she was hesitating, the little butterfly monster suddenly felt that something seemed to be approaching her from behind. She was startled, and when she turned around, she found that it was Sister Yu Yi who she was looking for. Did I scare you? Miss Maid smiled at this time. Listen, you first do this, then do this, and finally do this. Do you understand? Do you understand? Do you understand? In her mind, she seemed to hear the voice of Long Shaw. As if the replay button was pressed, it kept repeating in her mind like some kind of scripture. Luo Dance opened her mouth at this time. Miss Maid seemed to be very patient, just smiling and waiting for her to finish her words. Sister Yu Yi, don't you need to accompany the boss? Why are you here? The little butterfly monster suddenly changed the topic, but she only felt that Shinryu's voice started to replay crazily in her mind. Now, the feeling was no longer just ringing in her head. It was as if there were thousands of true dragons of the divine land beside her, and they were repeating the same thing in a broken voice beside her. If it's me, Miss Maid chuckled, but she didn't continue. Miss Pianxian, you don't seem to be feeling well, do you? Hey, the little butterfly monster smiled embarrassedly. She felt that her head was about to explode, and then she saw stars. The whole world was spinning. In the next second, she dashed towards Miss Maid. At the moment when she was about to fall, Yi slightly opened her mouth. There was a moment of hesitation, but it didn't affect her actions. Before the little butterfly monster fell to the ground, she had already reached out to support her. The little butterfly monster now lowered her head, looking unconscious. Miss Maid then looked around, as if she didn't find anything. Then she supported the little butterfly monster to leave this place, and entered a nearby room. At this time, a figure flashed through the corridor. Secret skill, so close yet so far. Kelowna Shinryu left this area in the next moment. When she stopped, she looked back and sneered. Then she quickened her pace. Long Shira soon stopped in front of a room, because she didn't know when that scheming woman would come back. Kelowna Shinryu didn't want to be pretentious, nor did she want to think about the bad influence of sneaking into a man's room in the middle of the night. She pushed the door open with both hands and walked in. The room was a little dark. There were only a few lit candles in the corners. For Boss Luo, it was impossible to directly capture him. Only when he wanted to let people know his arrival. Then people would feel his arrival. Generally speaking, only the most direct way to capture his existence could be used to capture his existence. Eyes. Even Kelowna Shinryu couldn't leave. Kelowna Shinryu kept complaining about this point in her heart. At this time, she was looking at a chair in the room. The chair was facing away from her, but she could see half of the head above the back of the chair. Long Shirual walked forward quickly. Hey, I want to ask you a question. Hurry up and answer me. Otherwise, your little lover will come back. She didn't get the expected response from Boss Luo. Long Shuhua couldn't help but be startled. Could it be that he's really asleep? Kelowna Shinryu muttered subconsciously. He wants to return to being a human. Is he so persistent? She was sure that she would win, but suddenly she thought that if he really fell asleep, Kelowna Shinryu swallowed subconsciously. At this time, subconsciously walked to the back of the chair step by step, whispering that, "Hey, I'm coming. Do you hear me? I'm asking you a question." She had to raise her voice a little. "Can you at least give me some response?" Boss Luo still didn't move from the chair. "Damn profiteer, do you think you can't hear me?" Kelowna Shinryu suddenly became agitated, suddenly turned the chair violently. "Are you afraid that I will eat you now? Huh?" Boss Luo wasn't on the chair. Turn around. It was just a pillow with a wig. Chapter 1388. On the white pillowcase, there was even the word Master written in very beautiful flowery handwriting. Although his knowledge of foreign languages was limited, he could tell who wrote the handwriting. When he was in the King's game, didn't that scheming woman write all over his face with this kind of handwriting? That damn woman! Kelowna Shinryu clenched her fists and the veins on her forehead stood up. She felt a strong sense of defeat. But she didn't stay for long and left the room quickly. Unexpectedly, when she closed the door and was about to leave, she met Miss Maid's smiling face, 3 feet away. "It's late, Miss Long. What's the matter? What did she come back?" Kelowna Shinryu was startled, but she didn't show it on her face. She combed her hair and said indifferently, "You have to ask your master." "Oh, didn't he tell you?" Miss Maid chuckled. "If it's not something important, he doesn't need to tell me." Kelowna Shinryu shrugged. "Maybe it's something more important, so he doesn't want to tell you." Miss Maid covered her mouth and chuckled. "If that's what he thinks, then I don't need to know. Since it's such an important thing, I don't want to disturb." "Miss Long, do you want to continue?" The true dragon of the godly land suddenly thumped his shoulder and said, "Oh, I'm a little tired. Some people are too enthusiastic, making me. Oh, it's late, I'm sleepy too. Servant, let's continue the servant's work." She seemed to treat Miss Maid as air. As she walked, she muttered something to herself and slowly left. Looking at the true dragon of the divine land leaving, the servant girl in front of the door bowed slightly and said politely, "Good night, Miss Dragon." The true dragon of China didn't even look back as she calmly left. She only felt that this was just a strategic retreat. How annoying. Later, Miss Maid pushed open the door and walked into the room. She came to the chair. The pillow on the chair had obviously been moved. Miss Maid picked up the pillow and found other words written on the other side of the pillow. "I don't want you anymore." "So naughty." Miss Maid put down the pillow without any expression. "This place is outside Kelowna." The pillow fell slowly and spontaneously combusted, leaving only a pile of ashes after it fell to the ground. She opened the window and waved her hand. The wind from outside swept in, swirling the ashes on the ground and then blowing them out. After closing the window, Miss Maid turned around with a smile on her face. She seemed to be in a better mood. She came to a table and sat down. With a swipe of his palm, a pitch-black laptop appeared on the table. Opening it, Miss Maid's fingers began to rapidly tap on the keyboard. She needed to do something, take advantage of this free time. According to the time, the chaos in the Fog City happened 1 day ago, so she needed to deal with some orders from her master. "I'll go outside and have a look. I'm counting on you to fix the world over there. I think Caesar will definitely enter that world again to investigate, and after the results are out, he will truly make up his mind to open this passage to the beastmen of this world, the so-called fix of the world over there." Of course, it was the history of the world behind the God King's plan, because the Master gave Caesar the ability to open the world over there 1 day ago. Orcs will keep appearing in the world over there in the future. According to Boss Luo, what Miss Maid needed to do was to embed the history of the orcs in the world over there, so that the orcs in this world wouldn't appear out of place when they arrived there. This task wasn't too difficult. She just needed to give the orcs a part of history in the world over there. Her fingers flew. The history of the Beastmen was also written bit by bit. They're a race that was oppressed by an extremely vicious dragon from the far east. As for the direction of the story, God knows. Farm, on a dark street. A figure was running quickly through an alley. He couldn't make a sound when he landed, so he could only minimize the sound he made when he moved and try his best not to disturb the surroundings. David had to stop in front of a wall. He ran a few steps and then grabbed the top of the wall with his hands. He flipped over easily like a master of parkour. With the help of the last pill, his injuries were not only healed in a short time, but also his physical strength was greatly improved. But even so, he still couldn't defeat a vampire servant. The revolutionaries were in a difficult situation. Although the activities in these years had liberated many descendants of the ancients, they were a group of people without an official identity in the inhuman domain. No place could take them in. They could only hide and then mix into different chaotic areas to find living materials. This kind of recovery medicine was just the most common thing in the eyes of the non-humans in the inhuman domain. But for the Revolutionary Army, it was a material that they almost needed to sacrifice their lives to get out of danger. The improvement of physical strength was only temporary. David needed to constantly calculate the consumption of physical strength. He needed to use the shortest time to find the other companions in the town who were still escaping. And he needed to meet Maiming again and ask what happened to her. But David had seriously underestimated the danger in the town. He also did not know that after Meow Meow had killed the guards and rescued them, the head of the town's guards had been enraged. Similarly, he didn't know that not long ago, the Torito clan had an internal conflict and even a superior noble died because of it. Now was the most tense situation. In the town, almost all the vampires who hadn't rested had been sent out to search all the places in all directions. With so many vampires roaming the town, it was extremely difficult for David to sneak around. He had to try his best to move in the places where the crops usually mingled. Only in this way could he hide the smell of the blood of the descendants of the ancients on him. If his companions couldn't be caught, they could only hide. And the hiding place had to be a place with a lot of crops, which was the dormitories in the farm. But even if the work of sneaking became extremely difficult and he brushed past danger all the time, David successfully arrived near the first farm dormitory. He felt that his luck seemed to be good, but he didn't know that now, in the farm, the vampires didn't care about the so-called Revolutionary Army that escaped again. The vampires in the clan were frantically searching for a terrifying killer at this time. Because, since Sir Busby, who held the authority of the clan, was attacked, in a short period of time, more than 30 vampires had been mysteriously killed. At this time, David looked at the dormitory in front of him, the 7th dormitory. He was thinking about how to sneak into the dormitory. He wasn't sure if his companions were hiding in this dormitory, and he couldn't make any movements outside to attract the attention of his companions who might be hiding in the dormitory. The vampire's hearing was too strong. Moreover, what made David feel that something was wrong was that the 7th dormitory was a little different from the other dormitories. Logically speaking, the dormitory should have turned off the lights in the middle of the night, but the 7th dormitory was still lit up, and there were even members of the farm as supervision team. In the farm where David used to be, there was also a farm as supervision team. Usually, vampires were the supervisors, and the subordinates were a mix of vampires and descendants of the ancients. The proportion of the ancients' descendants was even larger. They should also be humans, but it seems that they haven't turned into servants yet. David carefully judged that the few humans walking in the 7th dormitory were still willing to become the vampire's minions after knowing the truth. A certain thought quietly emerged in his mind. David carefully approached the dormitory. After climbing over the courtyard, he hid under the wall and carefully looked into a room where the curtains weren't completely drawn. In the room, a naked woman was hung up in the air. As for the 3 former crops who had become supervisors, they mercilessly swung the whip in their hands and whipped the woman. She screamed in pain. I really don't know. I really don't know. The woman was painfully begging for mercy. At this time, one of the men waved his hand and stopped the others from whipping her. He said coldly, "You worked with Tab and I for such a long time. You've always been his assistant and managed the 7th dormitory. How could you not know that he secretly played with the most valued crops of the nobles?" "I really don't know. The woman cried bitterly. I'm just a deputy. There are many things that I can't participate in. I really don't know anything. Humph. Still stubborn. Tell us, did you kill Tabanai or not? The man in the supervisor group said sternly, did you murder Tabanai and make it look like he committed suicide in order to replace him? I really didn't. I really didn't. A humph. I think you knew everything that Tabanai did, but you didn't report it immediately. Perhaps you and Tabanai are accomplices. How could it be impossible? You're an accomplice, right? You must be an accomplice. You were afraid of being exposed, so you acted first. You killed Tabanai, the supervisor of this dormitory, and you pushed all the blame onto him. In this way, you can rightfully replace him and become the new dormitory head. Then, you can continue to use your power to play with the most valued assets of the nobles, right? The woman was completely driven mad by the whipping. Now, she was suffering the painful whipping and hearing their roaring accusations. Suddenly, she howled angrily. How could you? How could you? You're also human. How could you? How could you be like those demons and regard your own kind as crops? Regard them as the assets of those demons. How could you? Umph! You dare to call the great nobles demons. Even the benevolence of the nobles can't forgive your sins. The man in the lead snorted. Even if Tabanai's death has nothing to do with you, your insulting of the nobles is a capital crime. The woman was so angry that she laughed. From the beginning, you never intended to let me go. You bastards. The man walked directly to the woman and pinched her chin, facing the woman's hateful gaze. I hate your gaze. With that, the man punched the woman's face without any hesitation. The woman's nose was instantly twisted, and she spat out blood. Bastard, bastard. Lowering her head and bleeding, she still cursed with resentment in her eyes. The man sneered, retreated a few steps, and then waved his hand. A man from the supervision team walked to the woman's back with a sneer and unbuckled his belt. The moment the man's pants fell down, the woman couldn't help but shout angrily, What do you want? The man in the lead sneered. You're very lucky, aren't you? You can stay and become a dormitory supervisor if you're outstanding enough. I don't know if those crops who came of age at the same time as you ever resented you. The man behind the woman took another step forward and grabbed her waist from behind. She became even angrier, and a trace of panic appeared in her eyes. The man in the lead of the supervision team laughed and said, Why don't you come and experience what your peers have experienced in the mating farm? After all, no matter what, from the file, you are still a pure virgin. Let me go. Let me go. I'll curse you. Curse you, bastards. The man in the lead sneered. Anyway, you'll be thrown into the mating farm sooner or later. Why don't we let you experience it in advance so that you won't get used to it later? Don't worry, we'll educate you well. With that, the third man in the lead walked to the front of the woman and then took out his ugly thing, pressing the woman's head down with one hand. Just as the two ugly objects were about to pierce into the woman's mouth and back, David broke through the window and entered. I'm ashamed to live in this world with you. Bastards. Chapter 1389. They were indeed on the side of vampires, but they were still human beings, not even servants. David, who broke in through the window, had more physical strength than the three men of the supervision group, due to the residual effect of the drug in his body. David, who had broken through the window, hit the back of one of the men's head with his elbow. This one hit heavily injured the man and knocked him to the ground. When the other two men from the supervision team saw this, they immediately reacted instinctively and rushed over. David picked up a chair and swung it at the two men. In just a moment, David, who had the upper hand in terms of stamina and strength, successfully placed all three men on the ground. The nobles won't let go. The man on the ground spat out a mouthful of blood and stared at David. Unexpectedly, David was expressionless at this time, raised his head, and stomped down. This time, he directly stepped on the man's throat and directly crushed his throat. Wait, we are also human beings. Looking at David's cold-blooded means, the remaining two men hurriedly said in horror, We were just forced David pulled out a dagger from the boots of the dead man and directly stabbed the other two men. I swore that I would save all my human companions, but not including animals. He pulled out the dagger from their bodies. His clothes were stained with blood, and the dagger was also dripping with blood. He walked step by step to the naked woman who was hung up. The woman looked at David in horror. At this time, he held the dagger in his hand and directly waved it at her. The woman closed her eyes in horror, but suddenly felt her body was loosened and she fell to the ground. She was liberated. The woman opened her eyes and looked at the man who broke in through the window in horror. Hydrogen peroxide or alcohol. David looked coldly at the woman sitting on the ground and said, "WH what?" The woman didn't respond. I said, "Hydrogen peroxide or alcohol." David stared straight into her eyes. "If you don't cover the smell of the blood, it will soon be noticed by the vampires. Do you want to track the real vampires?" The woman shuddered. Only then did she look at the three men who had already died tragically. Looking at their twisted faces, her body trembled and she hurriedly crawled up. She crawled to the cabinet next to the room in a panic. Because she was too frightened, she even knocked over a lot of things. Finally, she found a box, but it didn't have what David needed. "Iodine. Is iodine fine?" David didn't say anything, but quickly sprinkled iodine on the wounds of the corpses, and then wrapped the three corpses with a carpet. From the beginning to the end, the woman curled up in fear in the corner. When David finished dealing with these things and looked at her, she felt David's gaze and covered her body with her hands. She didn't even dare to look into this man's eyes. It was as if she was an ugly thing if he looked at her. "You're this dorm's supervisor?" David looked at the woman with uncertain eyes. He still hadn't put down the dagger in his hand. The woman said fearfully, "I'm just a backup. The housemaster here is already dead." A backup is also a housemaster. David slowly walked to the woman. Whether it's the supervisory team or the housemaster, they just surrendered to the vampires and gave up their human identity to survive, helping them to enslave us. Seeing David raise the dagger in his hand, she knew that she might end up like the three men from the supervision team in the next second. Under the strong will to survive, the woman suddenly screamed, "Even if you kill me, it won't do you any good. Let me stay. Maybe I can help you." "What can you help me with?" The dagger stopped in front of the woman, but she knew that if she couldn't say anything useful, it would still stab into her body. The woman quickly said, "Even if you kill them, you won't be able to escape. You can't fight against the noble vampires here alone. If you have a way to fight against them, you don't need to cover their corpses. You need help. I can help you. Leave here." "Why should I believe you, a backup housemaster?" David sneered, stabbing the woman's throat with the dagger. "For self-protection." The woman screamed. The tip of the dagger was already at her neck. She stared at the cold light on the dagger, breathing rapidly. "I can't escape. You also saw that they didn't intend to interrogate me. They just want to find a scapegoat. If you don't save me, my fate will be extremely miserable. Instead of that, why don't I save myself? Even if I die, I don't want to be sent to the mating farm. Don't you understand? If I have a choice, I won't choose the job of a housemaster." Looking at each other, they held their breaths for a long time. David took back the dagger, saying indifferently, "Put on your clothes. If you do anything strange on the way, don't worry. You won't live for more than 3 seconds." She held her breath for a while. The woman subconsciously covered her neck. Her body slumped down. Because she relaxed, she even incontinent. But she couldn't care less about her current ugly appearance. She hurriedly put on her clothes and quickly tidied up her face. Under David's gaze, she quickly pulled herself together and opened another window. She stuck her head out and looked around. "We should be safe for the time being. Now we just need to wait for daytime. At that time, the nobles will go to sleep. Only a few vampires will continue to move." The woman said while thinking, "The children in White Sky Town will have various activities, such as going to class or learning other things. If we leave at this time, it should be safer. I know a secret passage that can safely leave here and reach the edge of the farm." David looked at the woman and suddenly said, "You seem to be well prepared." The woman said expressionlessly. I said, I don't want to be sent to the mating farm, and I don't want to spend my life in misery. What's your name? And David nodded, but immediately said, From now on, you can't leave my sight. Now, tell me, other than these three guys, are there any other members of the supervision group or vampires in this villa? The woman, and quickly said, There shouldn't be any for now. There seems to be some conflict between the nobles today. I heard that a superior, noble vampire died. Compared to this, the suicide of a housemaster didn't attract much attention. David said, You said you know a way out. Now, take me to have a look. And didn't talk nonsense. After taking a few deep breaths to calm herself down, she quickly opened the door of the room. Those children should be dead asleep. Come out, try to walk lightly. Under the lead of it didn't take long for David to come to a utility room in the courtyard of the number 7 dormitory. The passage mentioned was in this utility room. As long as the heavy objects on the ground were pushed away and the floor was lifted, a secret passage that could allow one person to pass through could be seen. I don't know who dug this secret passage. I walked through it once, and it leads to the outside of the farm, and quickly said, I was ordered to clean this place once, and I accidentally found it. I observed it for a while, but I didn't find anyone using it. As she said, and directly went into the secret passage. Unexpectedly, David directly grabbed her arm before she went down halfway. What do you want to do? David asked coldly, and said matter-of-factly, Of course I want to hide here. Don't worry, I've put a lot of dry food, drinking water, and some other materials in the secret passage. It won't be a problem to stay in the secret passage for a month. You're really well prepared. David sneered. It seems that you're planning to escape from here all the time, right? And turned back and said, If even the position of a housemaster can't bring me any chance, why don't I leave this place? David said, Since you found this secret passage, why don't you take the children away from here? And was stunned. Then she frowned. I don't dare to say that I can escape from the clan's territory after leaving this secret passage. You want me to take the children? Are you crazy? Besides, even I, who know the truth, have never left the vampire's territory and never know what the outside world is like. Is the outside world suitable for us to live? I don't know what I can do with the children. Is it to drag me down or to send everyone to die together? Are you going or not? If not, I'll go. She broke free from David's hand and went into the secret passage again. But this time, David caught her again. Looking at the angry and in front of him, David just said indifferently, You can't just leave like this. I have 2 companions outside, and I need you to help me find them. You're crazy. I'm not going. Then I can only leave you here. David looked at him without any pity. Anyway, I already know the existence of this passage. You bastard who was stabbed in the ass by a dog. I'll curse you. And stared at the man in front of her with hatred, as if she wanted to tear his body apart. You have no choice, David said indifferently, dragging him out of the secret passage bit by bit. And don't try to resist me. If you want to live, do as I say. I don't want to waste time arguing with you here. This will only make my companion stay in danger for a longer time. And gritted her teeth, stood up abruptly, and walked towards the door of the storeroom. What do you want to do? David grabbed her arm again and said angrily, Aren't you going to find your companions? Then go now. Or are you just saying that, trying to be a hero? David snorted softly and let go of him and heaved a sigh of relief and asked coldly, Where are your companions hiding? I don't know. David shook his head and looked at him inconceivably. You don't know? You still love me? David said, If they are hiding, they must be hiding in the place with the most people. There are only dormitories in this place. And rolled her eyes, patting her forehead, saying indignantly, You can't even confirm whether your companions are hiding in this dormitory or not. Don't you know, even a dormitory supervisor, it's very troublesome to go out at night. Not to mention, I'm just a backup. Oh my God, I finally know why your revolutionary army has never been able to achieve anything. What did you say? David's eyes turned cold. Because you're just acting on your delusions, feeling good about yourselves, and you've never seen clearly what's real. David didn't say a word, but his eyes were filled with killing intent, and didn't know why she wasn't afraid this time. She just coldly looked at the man who was on the verge of anger, saying indifferently, "What? Do you want to kill me? Compare with those people just now? What's the difference between you and them? Bullying the weak, wantonly controlling the lives of the weak. Those who don't obey you, you want to kill them, right?" David took a deep breath, walking past and saying slowly, "It's late. Let's start from this dormitory. If they're hiding here, they'll leave a secret signal that I can understand." Bang! At this time, David only felt a buzzing sound in his brain, as if something had knocked on the back of his head. He immediately saw stars and staggered as he turned around, only to see and was holding an old frying pan in her hand. At this moment, seeing that David was still standing, and took the old frying pan in her hand and knocked it on David's forehead again without hesitation. As long as he was still a human, the skull was still a very fragile part, and didn't have any extraordinary strength, but if she used all her strength, it was enough to knock people out with the frying pan. Plop! After a series of knocks, David finally fell to the ground. Seeing that David fell to the ground and didn't move anymore, and hurriedly found some ropes in the utility room, and spent some effort to tie David up several times. "If you want to die, you can die by yourself," and patted the dust on her hands, looking at David's face, muttering, "A person can't do anything at all." With this, and directly lifted her skirt, walking quickly to the entrance of the secret passage. When she was about to jump in and escape from this place, she suddenly saw someone appear in the secret passage. It was the face of a young man with black hair and black eyes. "It leads to here." The young man looked up, looking at the woman who lifted her skirt and opened her eyes wide, smiling slightly. "Excuse me, can you let me out first?" "Madam?" "Luo. Boss. M." Chapter 1390. Hearing this, she was stunned for a while before she suddenly had a bigger reaction. She instinctively stepped back. However, after taking 2 steps back and accidentally stepped on something on the ground. It seemed to be a rolling pin. This was a utility room, so there were many odds and ends here, and lost her balance because she stepped on the round wooden stick. She fell back and hit her waist, then fell to the ground. At this time, a faceplate was tilted upward because of the cabinet. It was about to fall on, and she instinctively covered her head with both hands, hoping that it would not hurt too much. But it didn't, and opened her eyes slowly and found that the rolling pin was in the hands of the young man who came out of the secret passage. "Are you okay? Who are you?" In a panic, and grabbed the rolling pin that tripped her with both hands. She knocked down David, but it didn't mean she was good at fighting. She just made a sneak attack. Boss Luo put down the faceplate in his hand. Seeing him lying on the ground, Boss Luo reached out his hand. "Can you stand up?" He didn't seem like a bad guy. For some reason, she felt a sense of security, and instinctively reached out her hand to the unfamiliar young man, and with his help, she stood up. "Thank you." She didn't know why she said that, but soon she became alert. "Who are you?" Boss Luo smiled. "I didn't sleep last night, so I wandered around. I didn't expect to find a secret passage at the place where I stayed. Out of curiosity, I walked along the passage. Besides, I just lost something, so I wondered if the thief also left through this secret passage, something like that." "Oh, I see. Huh," and frowned. Who was he kidding? But why did she feel that he was so honest? Anyway, as a person who had lived in the farm for more than 20 years and was sure that she had never seen this person in the farm, this man, or a big boy, was probably younger than her. Vampire? She didn't think so, and looked at him carefully and found that the young man was looking at David, who was knocked out by her sneak attack and tied up. Do you know him?" she asked cautiously. Luochio shook his head. "No, it's the first time I saw him. I was just curious. I mean the situation here." And quickly shook her head. "I don't know what happened here. When I came here, this guy was already like this. I don't know who tied him up here." "I see." Boss Luo glanced at the woman, then moved aside and said casually, You're going down, right?" Yes, I was leaving," and nodded, with her eyes still fixed on the mysterious young man, Lin Sanjiu slowly walked toward the entrance of the secret passage. Just as she lifted her skirt and was about to jump down, she suddenly remembered something and stopped. Wait, did you come in from the other side of the secret passage? Boss Luo nodded and asked quickly, You said you live at the exit? Boss Luo smiled. Just temporarily. To be more specific, I was invited to stay by a vampire. Hasn't that villa been vacant for a long time? En's expression suddenly became excited as she widened her eyes. Boss Luo said, If it's vacant, I'm not sure. When I checked in during the day, it was quite clean and didn't look vacant. And looked at him suspiciously. So far, he didn't show any intention to attack her, and she didn't feel any danger from him. But she felt that it was too weird for someone to suddenly appear when she was about to leave through the secret passage. She couldn't help but be terrified of this secret passage. Why did he let her leave so easily? Generally speaking, shouldn't he ask what happened here? In the end, she said that she didn't know what happened here. This statement was full of loopholes, but he didn't doubt her at all, which made him feel even more inconceivable. Would he try to lure her into the secret passage? Was he really with David, and also a member of the Revolutionary Army? David said that he had a companion who escaped and was hiding in the farm. Thinking of this, En's heart beat faster. Didn't you want to leave? Boss Luo asked casually as the lady didn't move for a long time, and rolled her eyes and said, I suddenly changed my mind. I don't want to leave for now. I see. Boss Luo nodded and then smiled. Don't worry about seeing me. I'm just passing by, and I don't intend to change what you want to do. As for the suggestion, if you do what you want to do, there shouldn't be a problem. Sure enough, was he trying to lure her into the secret passage? En's expression changed quickly, and she pretended to be relaxed. You shouldn't be just strolling around, right? Boss Luo said, Didn't I say that the thief left through the secret passage, so I want to find out. And blinked and said, You said that something was stolen. What did the thief look like? I've been working here for some time. Maybe I can help you. Boss Luo said, If you can help me, I'll be very grateful. Actually, I can't confirm the identity of the thief, but it's a girl about 14 or 15 years old, named Mina. Mina? And was stunned and frowned subconsciously. Do you know her? And shook her head. The name sounds familiar. I think I've seen her before, but I don't think I've seen her before. But according to the age you said, this girl should live in the 7th dormitory. Very useful information. Boss Luo smiled and said, Thank you so much. In return, I'll give you a piece of information. Say it. And said quickly. Boss Luo said, If you plan to escape from this far now, I'm afraid the probability of failure will be infinitely high. Because of the current situation in the farm, the Torito clan has arranged many vampires to monitor the entrances and exits of the farm. What? And suddenly felt dizzy. How could this be? Boss Luo said, It seems that it's because an assassin appeared in the farm. So far, dozens of vampires have been killed, but the secret passage is still safe. When I came, I saw a lot of supplies inside, so it shouldn't be a problem to live inside for a while. And didn't comment. She had smuggled those supplies in bit by bit over the years, with the purpose of using them one day. So, if you can wait patiently inside for a while and leave after the matter is over, the success rate should be very high. And looked at Luochio and then at the entrance of the secret passage, hesitating. It was difficult for her to make a choice. Her intuition told her that this mysterious young man's words should be correct, even a very good suggestion. But what if it was just a lie? While she was pondering, the mysterious young man had opened the door of the storeroom and was about to leave. This made her anxious. She rushed out and blocked Luochio's way. Is there anything else, madam? And said coldly, Don't you think you're strange? You suddenly appeared and said these things. Why should I believe you? Be careful. Suddenly, a black shadow appeared behind Luochio. There was a loud bang. Something had smashed against the door of the storage room. The moment and warned him, Luochio had already moved aside. The attack didn't touch Boss Luo at all, nor did it touch his defense. And the one who attacked was David, and also hurriedly moved aside at the moment of the attack. At this moment, she looked at David, who was obviously furious, and then looked at the loosened rope not far away. She couldn't help regretting at this moment and didn't have time to think about how David got away. She had to think about how to get away herself. This David was obviously an idealist who was full of revolutionary ideals. This kind of guy was not rare, and his fanaticism was even more traceable. Just like when she was an adult and learned the truth of the farm, she almost broke down and finally became a substitute for a dormitory supervisor in order to survive, to replace her original belief after the collapse of her original belief to survive. The people of the Revolutionary Army probably regarded the liberation of all the humans in the farm as their new belief, so they didn't break down. She could understand David's fanaticism, but it didn't mean that she had to agree with the revolutionaries' idea. This guy is very dangerous. He's a member of the Revolutionary Army, and hurriedly said, "Let's work together to subdue him. Otherwise, he'll bring us a lot of trouble." It wasn't the time to carefully distinguish the identity of this mysterious youth, whether he was a friend or a foe. Based on David's indiscriminate attack, it could bet that there was no relationship between this mysterious youth and David. At this moment, David's face was full of anger. He touched the back of his head. After being attacked here, his scalp was broken, and there was still a little blood. He looked around the scene. The three of them were looking at each other in a triangle. And David were very nervous at this moment. Their eyes kept glancing back and forth. "It seems that my appearance has troubled the two of you." Boss Luo slowly exhaled at this moment. "Who are you?" David asked coldly. Boss Luo said, "Probably a businessman who is chasing after a thief." "Businessman?" David frowned subconsciously. "Businessman." And opened her mouth. Boss Luo smiled, spreading his hands and saying, "It's quite common, right? In ancient times, if there was a war, traveling merchants would often appear on the battlefield. They would sell all kinds of goods to people in need: battle materials, medicine, and even some daily necessities." "Huh," and blinked her eyes. David was vigilant while moving his feet bit by bit. Luo Chio acted as if he didn't see David's actions at this moment, lifting up a table from the ground, waving his hand to sweep away the dust on the table, and then drawing a circle in front of the two of them with both hands. Some broken things suddenly fell out of the circle and fell on the table. In the blink of an eye, the whole table was full of things, from some common firearms to some modern knives, as well as some expensive medicines and even food. In addition, there were also some strange objects, statues, feathers, mirrors. "These," and opened her mouth in surprise. Boss Luo smiled at this moment. "As I said, I'm a traveling merchant, so it's normal to carry these things with me, right?" As he said, more things fell out of the circle again. "Huh," and swallowed her saliva subconsciously. "If you two are interested, you can take a look and see if there's anything suitable for you." Boss Luo looked at the two of them with a very enthusiastic attitude. The only thing missing was a sign next to them that said, "Honest to all customers, come and take a look, special sale," or something like that. David and looked at each other, and both of them kept silent. David moved first, slowly walking to the front of the table and grabbing a long knife from the table. The knife body had a delicate blood groove on it, but overall, it wasn't very heavy, but it gave people a sense of strength. David couldn't help admiring it. "This is a tang knife made of carbon steel, very sharp," Boss Luo introduced briefly. Unexpectedly, just as he finished speaking, David sneered and waved the tang knife in his hand towards Boss Luo. However, Luo Chio calmly raised a wooden stick, the rolling pin that had been holding all this time. Who knew when his rolling pin had ended up in the other party's hands? And looked at her empty hands with a puzzled expression. The knife body didn't hit Luo Chio, but directly cut through the rolling pin in his hand, easily. When the tang knife stopped because of its exhaustion, David's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. At the same time, Boss Luo's voice sounded, "How is it? Is this knife sharp enough? It can even cut through the body of a vampire easily." "Very good." David raised the tang saber in his hand and carefully examined it. He really felt as if there was a steady stream of energy flowing from this saber into his body. "This saber, I want it. Tell me, how much is it?" At this time, Luo Chio turned his hand again, and a crystal ball appeared in his palm. He looked at David and said slowly, "In exchange, I want all the memories of your life in the farm before you became an adult." David looked at him again in shock. What he wanted was those nightmarish things. Chapter 1391. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. It was the sound of walking, and only heard this sound. It was the sound of an inconspicuous pocket watch on the table. Other than that, the surroundings were quiet. David was also quiet, and even thought that he could hear her heartbeat at this moment, because she heard her own heartbeat. The mysterious young man in front of her, or the self-proclaimed traveling merchant. His appearance made and feel absurd. Just like in the fairy tale she had read before, the mysterious person who would suddenly appear and help the hero of the story. Just like the fairy godmother who gave Cinderella a night of magic. It was like this feeling. But obviously, this was not a fairy tale world, but a world that was crueler than reality. No one would help for no reason. So he said that he was a merchant. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound of the pocket watch was still there, and began to count silently. It sounded like a sound in her heart, counting the time. David suddenly reacted. He was no longer silent. He looked at the merchant who put a pile of goods on the table and slowly put down the tang knife in his hand. Luaccio asked curiously, "Don't you want it?" David's hand finally let go of the tang saber's hilt. Perhaps he really did like this sharp saber. "If I sell those memories to you, then what will I do? I won't even know what I'm fighting for. Then even if I get this saber, how will I know what I need to do?" Luaccio didn't force him. He glanced at the table and then picked out another knife. It was a dagger that was much shorter than the tang knife. "What do you think of this dagger?" Boss Luo looked at David and told him, "This dagger is as sharp as the tang knife. Although it can't cut the vampire's skin, it can easily pierce the vampire's body if it is aimed at the vampire's heart. Moreover, it only needs a small part of David's memories before he became an adult." "Only a small part?" David was startled. His gaze fell on the dagger. His original determination was gone, replaced by hesitation. Luaccio nodded. "That's right. It's only a small part, and you can decide which part, whether it's when you were young, before you were 10 years old, or a few years before you became an adult." David's gaze became distant. Luaccio's voice got lower. That was the best voice and had ever heard. Even the voice of the girl, specially trained to sing and farm, couldn't compare to it. It was a voice that seeped into one's soul. He said, "If it's only a small part, it won't affect what you want to do now, because even if the deal is done, you will be very clear. Why did you forget this part of your memories? Of course, this is only my suggestion. Whether you want to buy it or not is still up to you." "Just now, what did you say?" David asked abruptly. "You said, I won't forget why I made such a choice, right?" Luaccio whispered, "It seems that you prefer this tang sword." "That's right. But there's one thing I need to explain. That is, just like what you said, if you lose all your memories before adulthood, you may not be able to do what you want to do. You may not be able to find the root of what you want to do. Even if you still know what you need to do, you may not be so determined anymore. So, if you only want power, I would suggest you to choose this dagger. In fact, after you think about it more carefully, you may even feel that this kind of transaction itself might not be necessary." "Unnecessary?" David shook his head. This time he directly held the tang sword. "Only power is necessary. Since I won't forget what I want to do, then there's no doubt that I need more power." Boss Luo just smiled. This time he didn't say anything, just made an inviting gesture. David expressionlessly placed his palm on the crystal ball, then closed his eyes and slowly said, "Although I don't know why you want my memories, I can tell you with certainty that if I can forget these nightmarish things, I would be more than happy to do so." The crystal ball gave off a faint light. Soon after, David was motionless, as if he had turned into a statue. After a while, it was still the same, and couldn't help but ask nervously, "What happened to him?" Boss Luo said, "Stripping memories is still a big burden to the brain. So in order not to let this gentleman's brain suffer too much, I just let him rest for a while. Don't worry, he will wake up soon. So, this lady, is there anything you like here?" And couldn't help but look at the table full of things. Her intuition told her that the things on the table could play an unimaginable role. Perhaps it was not an exaggeration to call them treasures. Just by selling some memories before adulthood, one could get treasures that could help oneself, treasures that could save one's life at the critical moment. Luaccio suddenly reached out and picked up the old pocket watch from the table, opening it in his palm. "Do you like this, lady?" Hour, minute, and second hands, transparent dial. This was the most precise thing Anne had ever seen. She nodded subconsciously, but soon she shook her head. She glanced at David, who hadn't woken up yet, as if she was waiting for some result. She wanted to see how David would look after he woke up after selling part of his memories. As a reference, she finally decided whether to buy something from this mysterious young itinerant merchant, self-proclaimed. "What's the use of this pocket watch?" And asked curiously. "It can stop time." Luaccio smiled. "Of course, the time stopped is relative. To be exact, it can temporarily stop the other's time." And opened her eyes wide with a look of "I believe you." Luaccio said casually, "Of course, even if it can stop the other's time, the range of its effect is extremely limited. Lady, if you use it, you can only stop the time of ordinary people, and only for 1 or 2 seconds. For ordinary vampires, it may not even be possible for them to stop for half a second, because as a human body, it is difficult for you to provide enough power for this pocket watch." It seemed more and more mysterious, and looked at the other things on the table suspiciously, suddenly asking, "If I sell the memories to you, can I buy them back?" "Of course." Luaccio smiled. "But since you have decided to sell the memories, why do you want to redeem them?" And shrugged. "Isn't there a pawn shop? No matter who it is, there will always be a time when they are short of money, right? It's not that you have to pawn it, but you have to." Luaccio smiled. "If you want to redeem and sell the memories, you can only exchange them with something slightly higher than the same value. Where's the merchant?" A smile appeared on Anne's face. Luaccio did not read any sarcasm from her smile. Instead, he read a kind of agreement. No doubt, the woman in front of him agreed with this method. "Egoist. Can I hire you?" And asked coldly. Boss Luo asked curiously, "Why do you have this idea?" And picked up a black pistol from the table and made an aiming gesture. She said, "I have seen similar weapons in books, but they are not as exquisite as this. Undoubtedly, even if I buy these things, I only know what they are." After saying that, she casually tossed the pistol onto the table and pointed to the rest of the items. "These are also, some of them, I can't even name them. What I want to say is, even if you give them to me for free, I won't use them. In fact, when I held these weapons in my hands, they might even give me some inexplicable courage, which might even lead to my death. So, why do I want to get into trouble?" Boss Luo's eyes lit up slightly and said softly, "It seems that you have thought it through." And said carelessly, "Since I became an adult, I am no longer the favorite of those vampire nobles. The nobles who used to like the taste of my blood may not even remember who I am now. No matter how excellent a person is, there will always be a time when he or she is forgotten. There's a saying, the higher a person stands, the more painful it will be when he or she falls. And only those who never intend to climb to a high place will not be in danger of falling. Naturally, there is no such thing as falling. So, since I became a dormitory supervisor, I've been making myself seem insignificant, even to the extent that I am dispensable. In fact, I have succeeded. If it wasn't for my bad luck today, where the dormitory supervisor of dormitory number 7 suddenly committed suicide, I think my life now may be in the best state." Luaccio said, "But don't you want to change your destiny?" "Of course." And chuckled and said, "Am I not standing in front of the fork that can change my destiny? But for the time being, I don't know which path is the one that can change my destiny. You want to hire me, just like setting up a branch in front of the fork, right? You haven't answered my question. Will you accept the job?" And didn't answer but asked back. She looked so confident, and her eyes were full of cunning. It seemed that she was already over 20 years old, but she still looked like a young girl. The trace of a young girl's mischievousness didn't disappear after she became an adult. "So, what do you want to hire me for?" And said bluntly, "Of course, I hope you can protect me and leave this place safely to the outside world. Speaking of which, I have been yearning for the outside world since I learned the truth of the farm." Luaccio asked, "But my, Didn't you just say that if it wasn't for what happened today, you could still work in the dormitory, and that would be your best state? And just shrugged. Aren't people like this? Only in a comfortable environment will we consider some exciting or strange things. I am indeed satisfied with the days as a dormitory supervisor, but I have never said that I won't be curious about the outside world. Besides, I have said if, but in fact, all these have already happened. The best state has been broken. Shouldn't we look for another stable state? She still looked so confident, and her eyes were still full of cunning. Only her legs hidden under her skirt were slightly trembling at this moment. Luaccio thought for a while. Mayam, do you think if you only rely on yourself, can you leave easily? And said angrily, if I have the ability to leave easily, why should I talk nonsense with you here? Isn't the answer obvious? Boss Luo nodded. Indeed, the answer is obvious. What do you mean? And couldn't help but frown. Immediately, she seemed to have thought of something as her expression turned ugly. Indeed, I should have considered this from the start. No matter how hard I tried, it would be hard for me to leave the farm. Even if I was lucky enough to leave the farm, I might not be able to walk out of the clan's territory. So, from the beginning, I have no way to go. In the end, it was because of the difficulty coefficient. Obviously, he didn't have anything that was worth the challenge. And finally smiled bitterly, pointing at the things on the table. If so, then pick out something suitable for me. At least, I won't be unable to resist it all. But I will only take out a small part of the memories before I became an adult. Why not take out all the memories? Luaccio pointed at David, just like this gentleman, and quickly took 2 steps back, and her eyes were full of vigilance. Are you going to force me to buy? I don't have this habit. Boss Luo just shook his head, but I am curious. Why do you think so, Mayam? Isn't this natural? And said angrily, like this guy, he sold all the memories before he became an adult. Doesn't that mean everything before he became an adult has become a blank? What he learned, what he did, all forgotten? Doesn't that mean he has become a useless person who doesn't know anything? Maybe he is even dead. At this moment, the motionless David suddenly opened his eyes and couldn't help but be startled. Obviously, this was not the so-called inhuman gaze, but a more determined gaze. Chapter 1392. And David didn't know each other for a long time. If it was calculated in decades of life, it was probably a trance time. Although it had only been a short time, David's hatred for the vampire nobles was so strong. When David opened his eyes again, the feeling he gave and was not as strong as before. She seemed to see something else in his eyes. He didn't look like a revolutionary army anymore, and was no stranger to the revolutionary army. People who wanted to resist and escape had always appeared in the big farm of the clan. Most of them would die tragically in the hands of the vampires. In order to prevent adults like and who were willing to serve the farm from having the intention to resist, they were often invited to watch the revolutionary army's execution and even the process of death. Those people's eyes were full of hatred even when they died. It was a bone-deep hatred, a very pure hatred. Their eyes were still pure before they died. Although they had grown up and experienced a lot, they were essentially no different from the children in the farm. He was now more like those adults who were willing to serve as supervisors, and more like herself now. And suddenly felt a chill. David was still standing in front of her, alive, but she felt that David had been destroyed. It was just a short time. There weren't as many punishments as the vampires, nor was there a long time of torture. Are you okay? And couldn't help but ask. I'm fine now. David's answer was out of Anne's expectation again. Far better than before. It can't be better. Better what's better? Anne seemed to be a bit uncomfortable with David in front of her, although she had only known him for a short time. Try it, and you'll understand. David smiled faintly at this time. There are so many things here. You can try it even if you don't want to. Sell some things that will torture you like nightmares every day, and then exchange them for something that will make you stronger. And stepped back in horror and bumped into something behind her. Then she leaned on David's face weakly. She saw such a strange smile on David's face. It seems that Sir should be satisfied with this transaction. Luaccio showed a happy expression, as if he was satisfied with the customer's satisfaction once again. Was this the face of a businessman? and was not too sure. Merchant, to her, was a very foreign and distant profession. There were no merchants in the farm. Everything the children here enjoyed was provided by the nobles, and they could live a carefree life until they reached adulthood. I couldn't be more satisfied. While saying this, David was also retreating. He was still holding the tang, sword tightly. When he was about to reach the door of the storeroom, he stopped and said casually, "If I want to buy other things, can I sell more memories?" "Is that so?" Luocio studied David and said directly, "After escaping from the farm and joining the Revolutionary Army, you seem to have a lady that you love, but you have hidden this feeling in your heart. If you want to continue buying, you can use this admiration as an exchange item." "This is a bit difficult." David chuckled and felt that this smile was somewhat evil. A person, after losing a part of his memory, would really change into another person. However, it was reasonable to say that he did not lose all his memories. Was he going to continue the transaction? And waited expectantly for David's answer. She did not know why, but she hoped that David would agree. Maybe it was out of curiosity. "I still have things to do." This was David's answer. After giving the answer, he directly opened the door and walked out without looking back, as if he had completely forgotten Anne's existence. He really left just like that, and was suddenly at a loss because she was the only one left to face this mysterious young merchant. She heard the ticking of the old pocket watch again. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Is he going to deal with the nobles like this? She hurriedly asked the question, trying to break the silence that had reappeared after David had left. "Madam seems to be very concerned about this gentleman's action." Luocio smiled slightly. "Don't you want to get out of trouble?" And shrugged and said, "I want to see if there's really nothing wrong with him. As a reference, should I buy something from you?" Luocio said, "Then have you finished your reference?" "Not yet," she said word by word, like a middle-aged woman who was standing in front of a new product booth and being sold a juicer by a salesman. Boss Luo suddenly said, "Madam, do you still want to hire me?" And said impatiently, "Didn't you already refuse?" Boss Luo said indifferently, "But we can use another method. How about I hire you instead? As a reward, I can take you out of the farm safely." "You?" And couldn't help opening her mouth and pointed at herself. "Hire me? What can I do for you?" She didn't understand how an ordinary person like her could help him. He opened his palm in front of, and an exquisite ring appeared in the middle of his palm. Luocio gestured and took the ring and looked at it carefully. She found 10 gray crystals inlaid on the edge of the ring. Obviously, they weren't diamonds, and she had never heard of any gray gems. "What's this?" and asked curiously. Luocio said, "Put on. Do you see the 10 gems on the ring? After accepting my employment, what you need to do is to light up these 10 gems. The gems will show a faint purple light." "How do I light them up?" and asked directly. She seemed to be a little tempted. Boss Luo smiled. "It's very simple. You just need to save those trapped in the mating farm and the slaughterhouse after the mating farm. That's all. The more humans you save, the faster the gems will light up and the number will increase." And was furious, throwing the ring away angrily. "Are you kidding me? You want me to save people? How can I save them? I can't even save myself." The boss was not angry. He snapped his fingers, and the ring that was thrown to the ground returned his palm. He met Anne's eyes and said with a smile, "Of course, I won't let you save people like this. You can use anything you want here." "What?" and was stunned. Boss Luo picked up the old pocket watch and put it in his palm. He stretched out his hand to and again. The ring and the pocket watch leaned against each other on the palm of his hand. "Is this guy serious?" And suddenly thought of a phrase that she rarely used on a daily basis. Obsessed. What was a ghost? Is it the kind of ghost that vampires are? Who knew? Vampire and ghost were 2 different words in English. She saw this word in the library, a travel book that was thrown in a corner and no one read it. "Well, I'm looking forward to your success. Brave lady." Just like that, the mysterious young merchant disappeared. As for where he was going, and obviously had no idea. Perhaps, as he had said before, he was just following a secret tunnel dug by an unknown person, intending to find the thief who had stolen his item. Would the thief be miserable after he was caught? She couldn't help thinking about these things that had nothing to do with her. but she couldn't find any clues about the things the businessman left behind before he left. The only thing that made it feel convenient was that the ring on her hand had a magical storage function. So many things were stuffed into the ring. When she wanted to use them, she only needed a thought. Such convenience. With so many useful treasures, and didn't hesitate. After Boss Luo disappeared, she immediately lifted her skirt and walked to the entrance of the secret tunnel. Was she stupid? With so many things, why did she need to ask someone to take her away? Right. Once the ring left the range of the farm, it would lose its effect and become an ordinary ring. The person had disappeared, but his voice suddenly rang in Anne's ears when she was about to jump. It was quite sudden. This made the dormitory supervisor candidate of dormitory number 7, who still maintained some of his original persona, so scared that he lost his footing and fell into the dark tunnel. After a while, and crawled out from the secret tunnel again. There were some white spider webs on her hair. She looked around suspiciously. She had a feeling that this mysterious guy hadn't really gone far, but was hiding in a corner to observe her. After a while, she didn't hear his voice again, and sat on the floor of the utility room alone, sniffing the musty smell of old things in the air. She carefully shook out the first thing from the ring, a pair of boots. Boots that can increase speed. The moment the boots were in her hand, the name of the boots naturally appeared in Anne's mind, as well as how to use them, and didn't wear them immediately. She was still thinking, muttering, "In the end, I still have to save people." She remembered that at the beginning, David also wanted her to save people. She scratched her head and shook the ring on her finger. This time, a cloak fell out of the ring. Cloak that can make one invisible. So be it. She gritted her teeth and thought. A group of high-ranking nobles of the clans gathered in a particularly luxurious building in the farm. There were all kinds of buildings in the farm. Luxurious ones were not rare. This kind of luxurious building was used to cultivate noble lady, noble young master, and other character settings. Originally, there were several high-level crops living here, but now it was temporarily requisitioned by these high-ranking nobles as a temporary residence. I can't believe that Busby dared to kill Baboki in front of so many people, a noble said angrily. His companions all agreed with him. At this time, they were criticizing Busby and criticizing the acting Grand Duke's irresponsibility and the fact that he easily transferred the clan's authority and looked down on the precious clan's authority. We can't let Busby take charge of the clan's authority like this. What right does he have? Another noble snorted. After all, he is just a guy with an unknown background. Everyone, compared to Busby's behavior, don't you think that Bailgan's behavior is more unreasonable? Another high-ranking noble knocked on the table at this time. He attracted the attention of all the high-ranking nobles. As a high-ranking noble, he obviously had a lot of prestige in the circle of high-ranking nobles in the entire clan. Marquis Gouda, what do you think? Marquis Gouda sneered. As the acting Grand Duke, he actually left at the critical moment. He even casually handed over the Grand Duke's token and condoned his subordinates to kill the high-ranking nobles. He even condoned his subordinates to change the supply rules. I think that Bailgan, as the acting Grand Duke, didn't fulfill his duty at all. So, I propose to use the privilege of the high-ranking nobles. The faces of the participants changed slightly at this time. The high-ranking nobles had many privileges, but there was only one thing that Marquis Gouda would solemnly mention in this kind of occasion. That was when more than 70% of the high-ranking nobles agreed. They could wake up the sleeping Grand Duke of the clan. However, no matter what the reason was, waking up the Grand Duke of the clan from his sleep would definitely make the Grand Duke unhappy. There were many such calls in history. In the records, more than half of the people who called were severely punished by the Grand Duke when he woke up. Marquis Gouda looked around at the nobles present at this time and said seriously, "It's not long before the next sacred blood ceremony. The Grand Duke is about to wake up. If it's a little earlier, the Grand Duke won't be unhappy. Moreover, this time, the awakening will be carried out by me personally. Even if there is any punishment, I will bear it alone. Everyone just needs to agree. Marquis Gouda, as you said, it's not long before the sacred blood ceremony. The Grand Duke will naturally wake up at that time. A noble shook his head at this time and said, "It's not a little bit of time. Why should we take this risk?" Marquis Gouda looked at the speaker expressionlessly. Indeed, it was not long before the Grand Duke would naturally wake up. For vampires with long lives, they naturally wouldn't care about a short 1.5 months. But it was true that the Grand Duke would wake up before the sacred blood ceremony. But wouldn't Baligan come back earlier? This group of pampered people who don't know how to use their brains. Trash. Chapter 1393. For Marquis Gouda, the group of nobles in front of him were hesitant and indecisive. The time they spent discussing was the longest. Vampires could quarrel with each other for decades, or even longer because of a boring argument. They would not reach a consensus in the end. He chose to leave his seat. If he could not get the agreement of more than 70% of the nobles, he would not choose to wake up the Grand Duke. After leaving the place for discussion, Marquis Gouda immediately called for a confidant. He was conveying something to this confidant. The guys inside need a little stimulation to reach a consensus. I need to give them a little stimulation. Do it cleanly. The confidant quickly took the order and left. At this time, a group of guards hurried over from the corridor of the palace. Marquis Gouda directly asked the purpose of their visit. This group of guards received Busby's order to come here. The purpose was to inform the nobles staying here that a powerful vampire killer had appeared in the farm tonight, and that 20 to 30 vampires had already been killed. This pair of guards who were sent here, other than informing him, also had the intention of strengthening the palace's defenses. Marquis Gouda, who knew the cause and effect of this matter, felt a chill in his heart. I know about this matter. The other nobles are all inside. I will inform them. Then, I will leave the patrol outside the palace to you. The guards took the order and left. After the guards left, Marquis Gouda slowly returned to the place where the nobles were discussing. Looking at the group of nobles who were discussing whether to wake up the Grand Duke, Marquis Gouda just kept silent and did not intend to say anything. Vampire killer. I don't mind this killer appearing here. Marquis Gouda suddenly smiled. Power is the best medicine to reconcile fear and cowardice. David calmly walked in the town of the farm. Ever since he left the storage room in the 7th dorm, he had been thinking about a lot of things. Selling his memories made him feel more relaxed than ever. However, the knowledge he had learned while living on the farm didn't disappear because of the sale of his memories. In his memories, he only removed the voices and shadows that he had grown up with. In all of his past memories, he was now alone. He was alone in the classroom, looking at the blackboard filled with words. He was running in the field, and the people around him were disappearing one by one. In the end, the whole school was empty except for him. In the cafeteria, people disappeared one by one. On the road, people disappeared one by one. During those 18 years, it was like living in a world where only he existed. He was like a machine, silently learning. There was nothing to be happy about, nothing to be sad about. There was no one to remember, and no one to hate. His life seemed to have started from the time he accidentally got the opportunity to escape from the farm, from the time he met the human of the Revolutionary Army, from the time he met the leader of the Revolutionary Army, from the time he met that woman. Does your world no longer exist? Do you want to try and live for me first? While the sale of the past made the memories of the past vague, it also meant that the memories of the present had become abnormal. After all, everything that he remembered now started from that encounter. Stop! In the dark night, there was a heavy shout from David's side. Was it the vampires' guard in the town? The patrol team? No, it was just the members of the inspection team. 2 humans and 1 low-level vampire. David stopped at the start of the shout and raised his hands. He looked at the inspection team members who were quickly approaching him, showing quite calmness. Even if it was not this time, after joining the Revolutionary Army, he had a lot of experience sneaking into the farms of the big clans. He knew that the most important thing to do at this time was to keep calm and try to calm his heartbeat as much as possible. The vampire's hearing was very strong. They could easily judge the human's psychological state by listening to the heartbeat sound. Who are you? Why are you still wandering in the town at this time? Raise your head. Let me see you clearly. It was the leader of the low-level vampire who asked. David slowly raised his head at this time. This vampire suddenly frowned and coldly shouted, "What are you carrying? Take it out." "I picked it up on the road. I really want to hand it to the noble master." David finally allowed his appearance to appear in their line of sight. They quickly recognized that this wasn't a face that was commonly seen. A completely unfamiliar face was obviously not a human male who worked in the farm. "Catch him." Cold light flashed. When the two human inspection team members approached David, their footsteps slowed down instantly. Another step forward, the two people's heads suddenly fell down. Blood splashed out. At the same time, David nimbly rushed out from between the two people and made a stab at the low-level vampire. Of course, it was still not as good as the vampire's physical quality, but the speed was so fast that it could not be measured by ordinary people. However, facing David's sneak attack at this time, the vampire obviously did not care too much about it. Because in its view, the attacker's speed was too slow. It casually pulled out the sword, lifted the sword, and slashed. As long as it used a little strength, it could directly split the opponent, right? After all, humans were still two fragile creatures. But what this low-level vampire did not expect was that its weapon would be directly cut open by the strange, straight knife in the opponent's hand in the next moment. Easily cut open. In a short moment of shock, it felt a chill from its neck. Looking down, its neck had been cut open by the opponent. Blood was flowing out. But the vampire's strong vitality did not make it lose its ability to move. It sneered. At this time, it stretched out its arm and instantly clawed David's shoulder with its sharp fingers. Didn't anyone tell you that even if a vampire's neck is cut, he won't die? It sneered. But because of the broken vocal cords, its voice became terrifying and harsh. Its steel-like fingers deeply penetrated into David's muscles. A trace of pain flashed in his eyes. At this critical moment, at David's sleeping arm, something slipped from the sleeve of his hand. It was a glittering dagger. Holding the dagger in his hand, David did not hesitate and directly stabbed the dagger into the heart of this low-level vampire. The moment the dagger pierced into the heart of the low-level vampire, as if it was piercing into the soil, the opponent did not seem to have reacted. He could not understand how this human could have a weapon that could hurt him. The heart of a vampire was not really fragile. It was the strongest part of the vampire's body. The heart would naturally produce a layer of horny substance like a shell, protecting this important organ. This dagger? But obviously, it could not get the answer, because the moment it fell, it had already died directly. David gasped for breath, forcefully pulled out the vampire's claw on his shoulder, then stepped on its body and pulled out the dagger. David looked at the things in his hands, the tang knife that he bought back, and when he left, when Anne and the merchant were not paying attention, he quietly took the dagger away. That's right, he took the dagger away, and the merchant did not find anything. He did it. He really did it. Without scheming, without planning, even without sacrifice. In a one-on-one battle, he successfully killed the vampire. He did it. David's heart was filled with ecstasy, but he resisted the urge to laugh out loud at this time. But the muscles on his cheeks seemed to be twitching. Gradually, he calmed down. He quickly left this place. There were no tools to dispose of the corpses, and the smell of fresh blood would soon attract the nearby vampires. David obviously did not intend to deal with more than a few vampires alone, even though he had tasted the fruits of victory from killing vampires. Just as he turned to leave, a small stone suddenly rolled out. David subconsciously looked in the direction where the stone rolled from. He heard 3 cats' meows, each with a special length. This was a means of communication used by the Revolutionary Army. David frowned. This time, when they sneaked into Torito's clan farm, everyone was caught. Later, only 4 escaped in the chaos. He had already seen Meow Meow, but Meow Meow suddenly had a strong power. David speculated that Meow Meow was likely to have met the mysterious merchant, and like himself, she also sold her memory. So, after David recognized her, Meow Meow showed a different reaction. While he was deep in thought, David had already followed the signal and soon arrived at another street. In front of him, there was a figure walking at a very fast pace. He knew that the figure in front of him stopped at a stable. David! At this time, the figure turned around and at the same time lifted the cloak on his body. It was probably soaked in horse feces and urine, and it smelled terrible. David opened his mouth. This was one of his companions in this operation, and one of the 4 who successfully escaped. It's really you, David. At this time, the companion rushed in front of David and grabbed David's shoulders with both hands. What did I see? You killed a vampire with your own hands. Oh, David, you are our hero. It stinks. Don't touch me. Yes, it's great to be able to find you. David also showed an excited expression. Are you alone? No, the companion quickly said. Ali was also here, but he was seriously injured, so I could only hide him in this stable. Oh, right, David. Are you the only one who escaped? David secretly broke free from the companion's hands. Let's not talk about this first. Take me to see Ali. I still have some recovery medicine here. That's great. The companion was very excited and quickly led David into the stable. David casually asked, How did you escape? Did you see anyone else? The companion shook his head and said, No, we didn't dare to hide in the dormitory, thinking that the vampires would definitely start a search in every dormitory. So, we hid in the stable and waited for a chance to escape when the sun came up. David nodded. The companion called Ali had already seen Ali hiding in a pile of hay. There was a very deep wound on his abdomen, and now it was just a simple bandage. It was impossible to really stop the bleeding. At this time, Ali could not even open his eyes and looked like he was in a daze. Let me see him. David directly walked forward and squatted down. At the same time, he began to carefully remove the cloth wrapped around Ali's abdomen. This time, we really failed completely. The companions sighed heavily at this time. We failed to live up to the trust of our companions. Now, even leaving alive is a problem. Are you afraid? David suddenly turned around and asked. The companion shook his head. The operation failed, and we were captured and tortured for such a long time. When did you see me beg for mercy? Am I afraid of death? I just feel angry. Angry at your own weakness? David said indifferently. The companion did not hear the change in tone and just nodded. Yes, I resent my own weakness. Not only that, I also resent the traitor. Traitor? David could not help but frown. The companion said, Yes. Traitor. David, haven't you thought about why our operation failed this time? We have been active so many times. Even if we can't get the ideal results, we won't be like this time, all of us being captured. So, there must be a traitor among us. We have been betrayed. David frowned. Who do you think it is among us? Not among us. The companion said seriously. I suspect it is the person we met this time. Have you forgotten? On the night of the operation, the contact of the Torito clan did not appear at all, but we were all caught in one fell swoop. David muttered. The leader said that our companions are hiding in every farm. But in order to ensure the safety of our companions, their identities are absolutely confidential, and only a few people know about them. Even for me, before this operation, the leader did not tell me who the contact was, but only gave me a secret signal. No matter what, I will definitely find the traitor. The companion gritted his teeth at this moment. David stood up, patted his companion's shoulder, and said as if to comfort him, Don't worry, I will definitely be able to leave here safely. The companion could not help but be startled. Then he smiled. David, you are wrong. It is us. Really? David smiled slightly. Then his expression suddenly became cold. What did I say wrong? David, you. The companion opened his eyes wide, lowered his head, and clearly saw a shining dagger piercing his heart at this moment. The dagger directly twisted the companion's heart several times. David looked at the fellow who was slowly falling down and said indifferently, It is safer for me to be alone, so I am not wrong. Later, David found some kerosene in the stables and set the stables on fire. It was probably another mess, wasn't it? He thought for a while, then put on the extremely smelly clothes that the companion used to cover the smell at the beginning, and quickly left. Baidu search 81 Chinese networko. No advertising message. Chapter 1394. David chose to start a fire and create chaos as a cover for his escape. More than a month ago, when he sneaked into the farm, he had already figured out the structure of the farm. Among the people on this trip, Meow Meow and another member of the Revolutionary Army were originally from the farm, so this further deepened David's familiarity with the current environment. The fire soon began to spread from the stable, followed by a few nearby buildings. When the patrolling vampires arrived, the fire was already quite fierce. Of course, this kind of fire was difficult for humans to put out in a short time, but for vampires, it did not take too much time. However, what the vampires didn't expect was that a bell suddenly rang in the farm, followed by a huge explosion. At that moment, one of the towers in farm collapsed in an instant. This was the explosive that the Revolutionary Army had buried in this tower early on, and it was originally used as part of their original plan. However, the Revolutionary Army led by David had been captured before the operation began. Now, not only did David set fire to a few buildings, but he also detonated the explosives hidden in this tower at the first moment. The explosion didn't hurt any of the vampires, but it was enough to attract the attention of the entire farm, especially the crops that lived in the farm. Lights on. Due to the explosion, the entire town was lit up. Chaos. Greater chaos would be his capital for a safe retreat. Under the night sky, David moved even faster in the shadows of the town and dashed towards Mating Farm. At this time, David met Meow Meow again. This time, Meow Meow seemed to be injured, leaning against the left side of a dark alley alone. Half an hour ago, in the square, Meow Meow was dealing with dozens of vampires alone. She may be quite indifferent to the Revolutionary Army that she had just rescued, but after leaving them, she resolutely chose to slaughter the vampires in the town in a high-profile manner. Maybe it was just a way for her to vent her anger at the injustice of fate, or maybe she just wanted to kill a few more vampires, or maybe she wanted to focus the attention of all the vampires in the farm on herself. Who knew? She was all alone now, and the only thing she could rely on was the black flame that was resting on the wound on her cheek. This black flame was indeed powerful. Before she got it, she could totally describe herself as a weak woman, right? Meow Meow Meow's breath was slightly unstable as she looked around at the increasing number of vampires around her. How many vampires were in the farm now? She did not have a specific idea, but she knew that her physical strength seemed to be running out. The powerful black flame obviously did not give her endless physical strength. After all, it was just the power of a weapon, not something that could fundamentally change her life structure. But let's continue to kill. It seemed to be talking to her like this. This battle quickly attracted Baseby's attention. Ever since he was ambushed by Mekong on his way to dormitory number 7, Busby had changed his route to dormitory number 7. Instead, he commanded the vampires to hunt down the vile vampire killer. At this time, under the siege of many vampires, Meow 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 was temporarily confined in the space of the square. Buzz quickly walked over with a few guards following behind him. He had already changed into a new set of clothes, but after tearing off his wings, he still looked a little dispirited. What's the situation now? A subordinate quickly came back and reported, "Master Buzzed, we have temporarily stalled this killer, but the opponent is too terrifying. She can use a strange flame, and once our men touch it, they will either die or be injured." Buzz had experienced the power of this flame himself, so he did not say anything about his subordinate's fear. He nodded indifferently, then looked into the battlefield, his brain frantically analyzing the situation. She seems to have slowed down. Is it a problem with her physical strength? Strange, the power of this flame. Why does it seem a little unstable? Master, you said it's unstable. A subordinate beside him looked at Buzzed in surprise. Buzzed was muttering to himself, but his eyes never left the battle between Meow Meow and the vampires. Suddenly, Buzzed waved his hand and ordered in a deep voice, "Don't come into contact with her or engage in pointless close combat. The main thing is to avoid this killer's flame attack. Keep your distance." If the flame burns you, as long as it doesn't touch your heart, break your limbs immediately. Yes, master. Following Buzz's order, the vampires in the square scattered at once. They had to obey Buzz's order. Originally, as the trusted aide of the acting Grand Duke, Buzz had a high authority to control the guards, and now he was in charge of the clan's authority. As long as it didn't touch his heart, he would break his limbs immediately. Obviously, he could still accept the order. For the vampires, breaking their limbs was just a matter of sucking more human blood afterwards, and they could recover. In just a short while, the vampires who changed their fighting style gradually exhausted Meow Meow's physical strength to a terrifying extent. She even had to gasp for air, and her body was dripping with sweat. She even felt that she was showing slight symptoms of dehydration. What was worse, because she couldn't devour the vampire souls for a long time, the power of the black flame began to decrease rapidly. I'm afraid I can't hold on for much longer. At this moment, Buzz suddenly sent his voice into the battlefield, into Meow Meow's ears. You can't hold on any longer, can you? Surrender. You can't escape. Then you can come and capture me personally. Traitor. Meow Meow sneered directly, and then suddenly urged the black flame in her hand. The flame instantly spread out, and its power seemed to have increased suddenly, causing the surrounding vampires to be afraid again. Again, traitor? Buzz frowned. He didn't know this killer woman in front of him, but why did she call him a traitor again and again? Don't bluff. Buzz calmed himself down and continued in a low voice. This strange flame of yours, there's a limit to its use, right? Maybe it's affected by your physical strength, or something else. For example, it can provide power by burning our bodies, right? Meow Meow was shocked, but her face was still as cold as ice, and the power of the black flame in her hand seemed to have increased a little. Is that so? Then you can come and try. Of course, you'll have to bear the consequences. I've analyzed it. Every time the power of your flame begins to weaken, you'll be very eager to attack us. Every time you succeed in burning our bodies, its power will recover again. Buzz said indifferently. As for whether this theory is correct or not, as long as I continue to fight like this, we'll know the answer after a long time. Then come try it. Accompanied by Magong's cold shout, she waved her hands, and the black flames suddenly burst out. In an instant, like a burst of fog, it spread out in all directions without any blind spots and covered all the vampires in the square. Seeing this, the vampires couldn't help but be shocked. No matter whether the power of this thing was weakened or not, once it came into contact with it, it would not disperse, it was real. The vampires had no choice but to hurriedly scatter. Even Buzz subconsciously wanted to avoid this burst of flame because he had suffered a loss once before. Unexpectedly, the burst of flame was very frightening, but it came and went quickly, and in just a short while, it had already disappeared. Master, the killer, disappeared. Go after her. Buzz calmly gave the order. She shouldn't have gone far. Once you find her, as I said, if she's burned, as long as it's not a vital part, immediately break her limbs. Remember, don't act alone. Yes, master. Then Buzz pondered for a few seconds and called over another subordinate, ordering, take a small group of people to the place where the nobles are staying today and tell them about this matter. Tell them to stay where they are and don't wander around. Okay, the subordinate thought. This message would definitely be delivered, but as for whether the nobles would listen to it or not, it was not up to him to decide. Seeing that his subordinates had already done their jobs, Buzz slowly exhaled. He still felt the pain from the wound on his back where he tore off his wings. Perhaps he really should drink some blood to replenish his energy. Since falling into the Lost Rift, he had not stopped to rest after several battles, let alone eat. He slowly ordered the subordinate beside him. Prepare a batch of mass-produced pure blood for me. At this time, the subordinate suggested, Master, why don't I go and call the crops for you? Doesn't the clan have a rule that if it's during wartime, you can directly drink the blood of the crops to recover? Besides, how can mass-produced pure blood compare to the fresh blood of the ancients? Buzz just glanced at the subordinate expressionlessly. The subordinate suddenly trembled in fear, quickly lowered his head, and quickly said, "I'll go and prepare the mass-produced pure blood bag for you right away." At this moment, a subordinate quickly walked over from not far away. His arm was forcefully grabbing the wrist of a girl, violently pulling her over. "Master, we found this crops nearby. Maybe she's the accomplice of the female assassin, just now." Buzz didn't speak, glancing at the girl who was caught. Then his eyes suddenly turned cold. He flashed past and saw the vampire's arm that grabbed the girl's wrist was instantly cut off. The vampire with a broken arm fell to the ground in pain. He covered the wound on his arm in fright, but he didn't dare to scream. He could only look at Busby in fright. He watched as Busby slowly put the girl into his cloak and hugged her gently. The girl was Mina. At this time, the girl seemed to be hugging something tightly in her arms. It seemed to be a roll of something. At the same time, she also buried her face in Buzz's arms as if she was afraid. Her body trembled slightly. "Continue your work." Ignoring the vampire with the broken arm who fell to the ground, Buzz coldly glanced at all the vampires around him. The group of vampires suddenly became silent. "Let's go." And these words were said by Buzz, looking down at Mina in his arms. Just like this, he took Mina away from the eyes of the subordinates. The subordinates didn't understand. They didn't understand why this master suddenly became so cruel. They could only silently watch Buzz leave with the girl. TSK. He hasn't really promoted to a superior noble yet, but he has learned the ways of a superior noble so quickly. He sees this crops as his private property, right? Shoo, lower your voice. He is now in charge of the clan's authority. He's just lucky that Prince Bailey... Forget it. Let's not talk about it. The square gradually became empty. I was too careless. Leaning against the cold wall of the alley, Meow Crow felt as if she had inhaled fire. The burning sensation made her feel suffocated. She gasped for air, but she still could not slow down her heartbeat. Obviously, her violent movements had exceeded the range that her body could bear. Out of self-protection, her body had gone beyond her will and stopped. The black flame attached to her cheeks was still burning, but it was like a flame that was about to be extinguished. It was like the last lit match in the hand of the little match girl in a fairy tale that she had heard before. But obviously, it didn't give her the same warm and wonderful feeling as the little match girl. Footsteps sounded. Were they vampires? But she couldn't even move her fingers. The footsteps gradually approached. She wasn't too frightened. Instead, she faintly felt relieved. Overall, she had killed a lot of vampires tonight, so it didn't seem to be a loss, right? They were originally people who were about to die. They should have already successfully escaped, right? Meow. It's really you. The footsteps had stopped, but what followed was a slightly familiar voice. Meow Meow raised her head in surprise, looking at the man wrapped in a foul stench, and subconsciously opened her mouth. David squatted down, and at the same time pulled the cloth off his face, revealing his original appearance. "It's me, David." Of course, she recognized him after he pulled the cloth off his face. Meow didn't meet David's gaze. She just slightly lowered her face, hiding her injured cheek in the dark corner of the hood. Didn't you escape with them? I came back. We still have 2 companions who escaped at that time. I was worried, so I stayed." David said seriously. You could have left. Why did you come back?" Meow frowned. "What can you do alone? I can't leave them in the lurch." David took a deep breath and said, "If I leave them in the lurch, then what's the difference between me and those vampires?" He looked at Meow and said softly, "Aren't we companions?" She opened her mouth, as if something had touched her heart, and looked at him blankly. Chapter 1395. He calmly met Maiming's gaze. After a few breaths, he remembered something and quickly took out a water bottle. "Drink some water first. You seem to be dehydrated." Maiming did not refuse. She really needed it. Although David's words touched her heart, it did not make Maiming let down her guard. This was because she had seen that when a person was good at lying, they could lie until they died. She did not believe David's words so easily. Even though David had returned from a dangerous situation alone, His words seemed so sincere. Perhaps, a few hours ago, she would have been very touched by his words. That man was the same. He said a lot of nice words. All right, where's Martin? Seeing that Meow Ming was no longer as cold as before, David asked. I remember that you escaped with him. Why are you the only one left? David did not know if it was his imagination, but he felt that Mei Ming seemed to have become much colder at this moment. The feeling that she gave people suddenly became cold, like ice. That person is no longer here. And her emotionless answer, no longer here. Naturally, he was dead. David knew that Mei Ming and Martin were both born in this farm. Later on, they successfully escaped and joined the Revolutionary Army. Their relationship had always been good. Martin's death was probably a huge blow to her. Was that why her temperament changed? Or rather, it was because she had obtained power. He wanted to find the source of her power from Mei Ming. Perhaps he could take it himself, just like how he took an extra dagger from the merchant. See, isn't this a simple matter? As long as you do it quietly and slowly, no one will notice that you are doing something bad. So, what is the secret of your power? David quietly observed everything in the Mekong Delta. At this time, Meow put down the water bottle. After a short rest, she regained some of her strength. She used the hood to cover half of her face and then stood up with the help of the wall. The vampires are still looking for me. I can't keep hiding here. What do you plan to do? David nodded and asked. Mei Ming was silent. She did not have any plans. After obtaining the power for revenge, she only thought about how to kill the vampires. She didn't even think about leaving this place. But it turned out that her physical strength was not enough for her to keep going. If she wanted to continue her revenge, she needed to learn how to adjust. Adjusting the power of the black flames, adjusting the devouring requirements of the black flames, as well as more combat experience. He had to bring out the full potential of the black flames. Meow meow. Let's meet up with the others at the mating farm. We'll leave when the sun rises. Seeing that Mei Gong was silent, David suggested. This mission has failed. We must return to the base immediately. But Meow Meow frowned. Didn't you say you were looking for your other two companions? David let out a long sigh and showed a painful expression. He lowered his head and grabbed his shoulder that was pierced by the vampire's claw. He held the wound tightly. Blood began to seep out of the cloth wrapped around the wound. David said bitterly, I'm useless. Allah still has. He raised his head, took a deep breath, and said slowly, Let's not talk about this. Let's hurry up and leave this place. Even if the two of them sacrifice themselves here, I will take their souls away no matter what. Meow Meow looked at the two necklaces around David's wrist. These were things that the companions of the Revolutionary Army would wear. If they died without a burial place, they should at least take this token with them. Take his soul away. The children living in the farm had never lived in the modern world. The method they learned was said to be a common practice during the war. It was more popular in the Revolutionary Army. Meow Meow herself wore a similar token. Looking at David's painful expression, Meow Meow's frown eased a little. She looked at David and said indifferently, If that's the case, don't die so easily. David looked at her and smiled. The same goes for you. His smile was so beautiful that Meow Meow could not help but be distracted for a moment. This person, if he was in such a situation, would he be so determined? Meow Meow did not know why such a thought suddenly popped up in her mind. She just turned around under David's slightly puzzled gaze and said indifferently, Let's leave this place first. If I remember correctly, there should be a sewer passage leading to the mating farm up ahead. Sewer passage? David could not help but be surprised. Meow Meow quickly said, When I was living here, my character setting was the naughty type. Once, out of curiosity, I sneaked into the sewer. Following the sewer, you can reach the mating farm. She paused for a moment before mocking herself. What I didn't expect was that the character setting that the nobles set for me allowed me to discover the truth of the farm. Perhaps those high and mighty nobles wouldn't even know about this. David suddenly said, I heard from the leader that many of our companions who joined the Revolutionary Army before us accidentally discovered the truth and planned to escape. But there were also some who chose to stay after discovering the truth. Meow Meow frowned. Are you talking about those mysterious supporters who have been hiding in the farms all this while? David nodded and then said seriously, Meow Meow, have you thought about why we failed so thoroughly this time? Our men were all exposed and captured. Not a single one of them managed to escape. Meow Meow said, You mean we were betrayed by the supporters here? David nodded. But we do not know who the traitor is. Meow Meow, you were once born in this farm. Who do you think is the traitor who betrayed us? Busby. Meow 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 suddenly whispered the name. David did not hear it clearly and asked subconsciously, What did you say? Meow Meow shook her head. At this moment, she suddenly pushed David away and pointed her finger. A small flame shot out and instantly hit a huge wolfhound and began to burn. The huge wolfhound struggled painfully in the black flame, but soon turned into ashes. It's the blood-sucking wolfhound reared by the nobles. David's face suddenly became serious. It seems that in order to capture us, these vampires have really spared no effort. But is this black flame the power that Meow Meow obtained? This way, after killing the blood-sucking wolfhound, Meow Meow did not hesitate and directly sped up. Because the flame burned the wolfhound, it temporarily replenished its power and calmed down a little. Night, perhaps it was almost dawn. On the roof of a big house not far away, a pair of eyes silently watched the two figures quietly moving in the town. Luaccio. Two people who no longer have hearts have finally met. Just like this, when the two figures disappeared in the normal range, Boss Luo slowly stepped back a few steps, and his figure gradually faded. Soon, Busby brought Mina to a nearby house. This was a small theater, which was usually used as the place for crop-s activities. In the theater's lounge, the young girl Mina held something tightly in her hand and handed it to Busby with both hands. This is... Busby was startled and looked at the thing in Mina's hand with a puzzled expression. This was a scroll of animal skin. Busby knew what it was. It was obviously something that the three people of unknown origin found in the Lost Rift. And it was the second diary. Brother, have you forgotten? Mina had a hard time to get it from them. She hugged Busby's waist and looked up at him. Mina almost exposed herself. But at least I got it this way. No one will find out brother's identity. Mina. Busby lowered his head and hugged the girl's body tightly. He took a deep breath and smelled the girl's hair mixed with the fragrance of her body. Thank you for your hard work. His fangs grew out of his lips little by little. He only heard the girl's whisper, Brother, are you hungry? Mina is ready. Ah, really? I can't control myself anymore. Busby slowly closed his eyes and let his instincts drive his body. Feeling the feeling of the fangs piercing his skin, he gradually lost himself in a huge vortex. Clang! The clan's authority in his hand suddenly fell from his palm. After a long time, the girl tidied up her collar and then snuggled into Busby's arms like a well-behaved kitten. She asked innocently, Brother, will you always be with Mina? Yes. He was like a person who was absent-minded, and his eyes were empty. Then, they gradually regained their color. Busby took a deep breath and helped the girl up. Mina, you stay here and don't leave. Busby said quickly, Wait for me to deal with the killer, and then I'll come back for you. This killer's target is only the vampires. She probably doesn't intend to hurt the children here, so you should be safe. The girl obediently buttoned a button on Busby's collar. Mina will wait here for brother to come back. Be careful on the way. Busby nodded and handed the second diary to Mina. Help me keep this safe. Wait for me to come back. The girl gently sent the vampire out of the lounge and then laid down on the sofa in the lounge. She held the second diary with both hands and slowly opened it, reading it by herself. From time to time, the girl would laugh a few times, as if she was very happy. Cloak that can make you invisible, boots that can increase speed. In addition, and took out a pair of gloves from her ring, called gloves that can increase strength. Oh, she suddenly felt like she had become a hero who could slay a dragon. Well, Which storybook did she read about the dragon-slaying story? She was a person who liked to think nonsense. Even if she was doing something dangerous, she couldn't stop this obviously bad habit of hers. But what could she do? After all, this was the character setting that was created from the moment she was born. Delusional Chinibu. Who knew what a Chinibu was? She knew about delusions. Anyway, before she became an adult, she was told that as long as she liked delusions, she could do it every day. Of course, she used to say a lot of words that were very shameful now, in front of her companions. What a dark history! And shook her head in a self-deprecating manner. In the end, the item that the mysterious traveling merchant gave her was very reliable. At the very least, she had successfully entered the mating farm with the help of the equipment she was wearing, and she did not alarm the vampires along the way. Miss and even naughtily mixed some of her saliva into the breakfast of a vampire she met on the way. Finally, he managed to enter the mating farm without any danger. In fact, and didn't know much about the mating farm, the adult descendants of the ancients who stayed to work in the mating farm were basically forbidden to enter this place. Of course, it didn't mean that and didn't know something about the mating farm. It was like in order to prevent them from being disloyal, they were arranged to watch the execution of the captured Revolutionary Army. In order to make them more loyal, they were also allowed to see the situation of their kind in the mating farm. But and felt that what she had seen before was not even half as real as the mating farm. She was currently in a huge house, an icy cold house. Rows and rows of women were currently imprisoned on chairs. Their clothes had long since been stripped off, and there were even breast pumps on their bodies. The women were blindfolded and couldn't move at all. Perhaps they hadn't washed their bodies for a long time, and the whole room was filled with the stench of sweat. However, the sweet milk was constantly being extracted and then accumulated through the pipes. Anne's legs were trembling as she walked among these women, looking at their withered bodies. Suddenly, as if she was stimulated by something, she suddenly walked in front of a woman and reached out to untie the thing on her head. Hollow, sunken, and skinny. What kind of desperate gaze was this? She suddenly collapsed in front of the woman's gaze. Chapter 1396. And shuddered all of a sudden. Instinctively, she covered the woman's eyes again before she could even think. But then what? What should she do? Who could tell her? What should she do next? Even with the cloak of invisibility, she didn't feel safe at all. This horrible room gave her a strong sense of uneasiness all the time. The tools that were installed on all the women here seemed to have been placed on her at some point, draining all her strength out of thin air, and found it difficult to move her feet. It was as if her feet had grown roots and were rooted in the room. Suddenly, and heard footsteps, she turned her head subconsciously and saw two servants of the vampires coming in. They were not even low-level vampires. They had only transformed once and were almost the lowest labor force in the vampire circle. But even so, they were much more powerful than her, and stepped back subconsciously. She watched the two vampires coming closer. Her heart beat. It was crazy, as if her heart was about to jump out, until she unconsciously stepped back and bumped into the wall, making a soft sound. What's that sound? Vampires were very sensitive to sound. At this time, they looked in the direction of the strange sound. But obviously, this vampire didn't see anything, and neither did the other vampires who came in with him. Did I hear wrongly? The two vampires looked around in confusion, but didn't find anything. Then they started their work, collecting, feeding, and checking the health of these individuals who were producing milk. She was invisible now, seeing the actions of the two vampires, and breathed a sigh of relief. But she still didn't dare to move. She didn't even dare to open her eyes and look here carefully. The women, those who were confined to the chairs, their teeth were pulled out and tubes were inserted into their mouths. Every day, they were fed liquid food through the tubes. Gurgle, 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 gurgle. It was like a factory. Liquid food was poured into their mouths through a pipe. When it entered their esophagus, there was a faint gurgling sound. Then, the two vampires activated some kind of device and began to extract the essence of life from their bodies. Even though she had already imagined what kind of scene it would be when she entered, and only felt the true terror when she saw it with her own eyes. This one seems to be broken. What do you mean it looks like? It's already broken. I've already drawn blood. Oh, then let's change it. But don't waste this little bit of blood. As they spoke, the two vampires removed the tools from the woman's body and began to suck her blood. Not many vampires were willing to work here, not even the low-level civilians. Those who were willing to work here were mostly because of the fast food from time to time. It didn't look like it was breastfeeding. Instead, it looked like a vulture gnawing on a corpse. Bang, bang. After two soft thuds, the two vampires on the woman lost their strength and fell to the ground. Behind them, Anne's hands were still trembling slightly. A tranquilizer gun that can knock out elephants. She didn't even know when she took out the tranquilizer gun from the ring. She didn't even realize that she had shot out 2 tranquilizer bullets in succession. After the 2 vampires fell to the ground for a while and rushed to the woman who was being bitten. Save, save, save. Was there anything in the ring that could save people? She begged crazily. Whether it was the cloak, the gloves, or even the tranquilizer gun, they all seemed to be naturally thrown out from the ring according to her needs. Anything is fine. Clang. A small bottle fell to the ground and was stunned. She picked up the bottle. She looked at the woman who was judged to be broken and then at the bottle in her hand. Clenching her teeth, she pulled out the catheter from the woman's esophagus with force. Even so, the woman's eyes were still empty and there was no reaction at all. Just like what the vampire said, she was already broken. And gritted her teeth and poured the liquid in the bottle into the woman's mouth. But the woman had lost the ability to move her mouth. Her lips couldn't close by themselves. Anne's hands trembled and covered the woman's mouth. Perhaps it was an instinct. She even hugged the woman's thin and weak body tightly. Don't die. Don't die. Do you hear me? Don't die. Drink it. Don't die. She kept whispering in the woman's ear. Drink it, and gradually exerted more strength with her hands and voice. Can you hear me? Don't die. Don't die. Come back to life. Come back to life. Gurgle, and didn't know if she was hallucinating. The woman in her arms seemed to move a little. Because of this, one of the gray gemstones in the ring on her finger gently flashed, but the flash quickly disappeared. The gray color of the gemstone was barely discernible to the naked eye, and a trace of gray faded away, and didn't notice the change of the gem on the ring. She let go of the woman and found that the woman's body gradually changed. First, the dull skin began to shine, then the lost muscles began to recover. Even the teeth that were pulled out began to grow little by little, until the woman became a healthy person and her eyes regained their luster, and heaved a heavy sigh and murmured, "Great, finally, God." The woman looked ahead blankly. Then, her eyes suddenly burst with a strong sense of expectation, and her voice became real. "God, God, where are you?" And was stunned. Then she remembered that she was still wearing the cloak that could make her invisible. She quickly untied the cloak and showed her original appearance. The woman was startled when she saw her appear out of thin air, and hurriedly said, "I'm not a god. I'm just a person who saved you. How do you feel now?" "God." The woman was startled by Anne's appearance, but her eyes suddenly became fiery again. It was something that was even brighter than before. "God," and couldn't help but be startled. Just as she was about to say something, she suddenly noticed a flash of light from the ring on her finger. After the flash of light, the gemstone became clearer and brighter. It was no longer gray. Although it was still far from being able to change color, it had really lit up. The traveling merchant said that as long as she saved people, she could light up the gem on the ring. The more people she saved, the faster the gem would light up, and looked at the woman in front of her who had come back to life and even recovered. However, she seemed to have some mental problems and mistook him for a god, and did not waste time explaining anything to this woman. Instead, she chose to save the other women in the room. First, she stopped the equipment in the room, and then she fiddled for a while to safely take out the tubes in the women's mouths. The magical potion kept falling from the ring, and began to use the potion to restore the women here. Later, she found that a little was enough to restore a woman. Speaking of which, were there so many potions on the table at that time? She felt that the things in the ring were much more than what the traveling merchant had displayed at that time. However, what the hell? And looked at those women who were saved and restored, and couldn't help but frown directly. The gem on the ring didn't light up. Because of this, it didn't even light up at all. Instead, the original brightness of the first gem completely dimmed down. This broken ring was an inferior product? Of course, this was just Anne's imagination. She had long admired the ability of this ring. She just couldn't figure out how to really light up the gem on the ring. God. At this moment, the first woman who was rescued by and suddenly spoke up beside her and looked at her, and when she met her eyes, she was suddenly startled by the woman's gaze. This gaze was just like the first time the children in the farm learned that they were named by the vampire. Maybe it was a little different, but it didn't seem to be different, and subconsciously glanced at the gem on the ring. It seemed that the dim gem seemed to have brightened up a little, although it hadn't completely broken away from the gray. Was it because of this gaze? And was startled and asked in a low voice, "What's your name?" "Amanda." "My God." And shook her head and said, "Okay, Amanda, I'm really not a god. Like you and them, I'm also human. And I'm also a human born in the farm." "No." Amanda suddenly pounced in front of and raised her head and looked at her with great devotion. "You're my God. It's you who woke me up in the darkness. What I saw was light. You gave me light. You're my God." Along with Amanda's fanatical and even somewhat neurotic speech, the gem on the ring instantly lit up again. This time, the brightness directly made the gem completely break away from the gray level. Red, orange, yellow, light green. The first gray gem on the ring had finally turned into a light green color. There were a total of 10 gems. After turning light green, it was so bright. What the hell? And XIN felt a chill in her heart. Sensing the fanaticism in Amanda's eyes at this moment, she had a flash of inspiration and thought, not only do I have to save them from danger, but I also have to make them become like Amanda in order to truly light up the gem on the ring. And subconsciously looked around at the women who had been rescued and whose bodies had been repaired. However, they were still sitting on the chairs in a daze. In other words, I'm going to become a god in their hearts. She was shocked by her own thoughts and thought that it was because of her lingering paranoia and shook her head. Although she subconsciously denied this idea, she vaguely felt that simply saving these women was not really saving. At least they had to recover their spirits. Then it would be counted as saving, right? But what method should I use to recover their spirits? And couldn't help but start to feel troubled. She looked at Amanda, who was still beside her. To be exact, was still kneeling on the ground, and scratched her head. "Can you stand up first? I have some questions that I want to ask you." "Yes." "My God." Amanda slowly stood up, but lowered her head, looking very obedient. "You mean because you heard my voice?" And thought for a while and asked, "Because you heard my voice, so? Well, because you woke up?" "Yes, my God." Amanda nodded. "It was you who saved me from the abyss of despair and gave me warmth and faith." And nodded and began to ponder. Voice. Stimulation by words? And thought for a while, and then began to walk to one of the women who had recovered but was still in a daze, and then began to speak in her ear. As she spoke, she observed the reaction of the gem on the ring. But no matter what she said, the woman in front of her had no reaction at all. As and spoke, she was even a little annoyed, waving her hand gently to touch the woman's cheek, but there was no reaction. She then tried to touch 2 other women, but still didn't get the desired effect, and sighed. It seemed that lighting up the first gem and even reaching the brightness of light green was really a coincidence. She shook her head and began to feel troubled again. This milk factory was just one of the places in the mating farm. There were 2 similar factories. There were other factories with other functions. But here, except for Amanda, the others couldn't move. Not to mention waking up these women's minds. How to take them away was a problem of the century. "Can't you at least give me a hint, Mr. Itinerant Merchant?" And smiled bitterly and muttered to herself. But at this moment, a scream suddenly sounded in this milk factory. It was Amanda's voice. It turned out that just as Anne was trying to wake up the other women, the 2 vampires who were unconscious after being shot by the tranquilizer gun had woken up The two vampires who woke up instantly caught Amanda. "Don't move. Who are you? Why are you here?" The vampires stared at Anne at this time, and at the same time, they bared their fangs. Chapter 1397. They were vampires. They were demons, the source of all the pain. She should have killed them. No, at the very least, she should have tied these two vampires up completely from the beginning. She should have used a rope. Rope wouldn't work. She should have used an iron chain. 1 round. No. 2 rounds. 3 rounds. Or kill. If she could kill them, Amanda wouldn't be held hostage, and she wouldn't be in danger. Why didn't she do that? Why didn't she think of that? And felt like her heart was about to jump out of her chest, and her thoughts almost stopped. Cold sweat. Her whole body was weak, and her legs were rooted to the ground. She didn't even dare to look into the eyes of these two vampires. She moved her eyes away, and her eyes met the eyes of the other women. These eyes seemed to have changed a little. They didn't seem to be dull and empty. Instead, they became fearful of the two vampires in front of them, who only showed their sharp fangs and slightly sharpened eyes. Trembling, fear began to spread from these women like a plague. They suddenly hugged their own bodies tightly, trembling, curling up. After curling up, they trembled even more violently, as if they were people who had been trapped in a dry well without seeing the light of day for a year, 3 years, 10 years, and suddenly saw the light of day at the mouth of the well. Fear. She was the same as them. Herself. She was actually the same as them. Exactly the same as them. Even if she didn't suffer such torture in this factory, she was the same as them. Ever since all the beautiful memories were destroyed that day, ever since he left the dreamy farm for the first time, he saw the revolutionary army that was executed, and he occasionally saw the fate of the adults who weren't good enough in the farm. The horror of vampires had been deeply imprinted in his mind. Facing the few men from the inspection team who wanted to violate her, she could let out the most vicious curse. Facing David, who was also a human, she could also attack him from behind without hesitation. But when facing vampires, she didn't even subconsciously think about destroy, kill, and damage. She couldn't summon the slightest courage to resist. Even if she had such thoughts, it was just something that drifted around the edges. On one hand, he wanted to walk out of this nightmare, but on the other hand, there was nothing he could do. One person couldn't do anything at all, right? Humph. It was a cold snort from one of the vampires. The speed of the vampires was as fast as ever, and knew that they were so fast, just like ghosts. It clenched its 5 fingers together, and its palm was like a sharp spike, stabbing toward her. Anne's pupils constricted abruptly. She thought of resisting. She felt that she should be able to resist. She thought of the ring on her hand. There were many useful things in it. But what should she use? Without time to think, she instinctively raised her arm, but the sharp pain had already begun to spread from her body. The vampire's thorn-like palm directly pierced through her abdomen. After twisting and pulling it out, and painfully covered the wound on her abdomen with both hands and fell to the ground. She thought that she must have opened her mouth and opened it very wide, but why couldn't she make a sound of pain? Her throat seemed to have been blocked, and her entire body began to convulse. She fell to the ground and could only look up and down. Blood dripped from the vampire's palm. It was her own blood. A little further away, Amanda suddenly sat on the ground, absent-minded. She collapsed. Suddenly, she held her head and screamed in grief. The vampire seemed to have said something. What did it say? She couldn't hear it. She felt that she couldn't even move her favorite delusion. I have to leave like this. Since I became an adult, I don't know if this is a life or not. Her vision began to blur. It became dark. She couldn't see anything. As expected, she couldn't do anything by herself, right? If she had known, she wouldn't have used the tranquilizer gun. She would have used something that could kill them. Anything, as long as it could kill them. She didn't have a chance? I'm sorry, Amanda. I'm not a god. I'm just an incompetent human who's always better at talking than doing. If you could do it all over again, what would you do? Do it all over again. How could it be possible? Would you really plan to fight against fate instead of just thinking about it? Yes. Probably. Who was talking? It seemed to be his voice. Was it a hallucination before death? Or something else? Then, go one more time. He said so. But one more time. What? She suddenly woke up, as if she had a long dream. Air rushed into her lungs, and then opened her eyes. The ground was still cold and sticky. It was the texture of his own blood that filled up all the gaps between his cheeks and the ground after his blood flowed out. Her abdomen no longer hurt, and even the wound had disappeared. She still had a bottom-up view, but the difference was that Amanda was now being held up by the neck by one of the vampires. You acted too fast. You should at least ask this woman what method she used to restore these women. How would I know it was so easy to kill them? But if you want to know, why don't you just ask this? You're really reckless. Yeah, where's the woman's body? They all looked at the place where and fell. There was only a pool of blood left on the ground. What happened? They fiercely looked at each other. Then they felt as if there was a huge danger approaching. But before they could react, a loud sound instantly exploded in their ears. They saw that one of the vampire's head had exploded. It fell to the ground and became a headless corpse, twitching and then stopped moving. The lowest level vampires couldn't survive for a short period of time and rely on replenishment like the high-level vampires in the patrol team. Even if their heads exploded, as long as their hearts were still there, they could still recover. It died just like that. The remaining vampire suddenly let go of Amanda and rushed somewhere in the factory. It intended to sound the alarm. Bang, bang, bang. 3 loud noises sounded in succession. The vampire's arms and left leg that rushed to the alarm station were directly broken after the noises. It seemed to be broken by an explosion. It fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Its distorted face was like a dying beast. It didn't even see where the enemy was, but it felt that the enemy was right in front of it. There was a slight heartbeat sound in front of it. Finally, it saw, and again, the woman who was supposed to be dead because her body was pierced right from start, just like a painter's painting, and appeared in the 3-dimensional world little by little. She slowly lifted the cloak on her body and finally became 3-dimensional. Her right hand was holding a strange firearm that looked like a gun in the past. There was still a trace of smoke coming out of it. Anne's cheeks were still stained with blood. It was her own blood, which dyed half of her face and half of her lips red. Why did you? And didn't speak. The gun was pointed at the seriously injured vampire at this time, and then she stepped back little by little. She stepped back to Amanda's side. Amanda's dazed eyes gradually regained color. She didn't have time to speak, and walked behind Amanda, grabbed her hand, and gripped the gun in her hand. Both of them gripped the old gun at the same time. Aim, aim, she whispered in her ear. Now, I'm your god. With Amanda in tow, and pulled the trigger. Bam! On the ground, the dying vampire's chest was instantly blasted open by the bullet from the gun. It turned into a pile of flesh, emitting a burnt smell. Phew! And exhaled deeply and looked at her abdomen subconsciously. If it weren't for the torn clothes and the intact skin, she wouldn't even believe that it had been penetrated. But now, and gently covered her abdomen. She could feel that it had really healed, but when she inadvertently looked at the ring on her finger, she found that the light green gem had completely dimmed. The brightness seemed to have been consumed, and couldn't help but feel confused. Was it because of the consumption of the brightness that she was resurrected, or was there some other reason? And the voice she heard in the end, was it her own illusion, or she shook her head and shook these chaotic thoughts out of her mind for the time being? She turned to look at Amanda. At this moment, Amanda was still holding the gun in both hands. She sat on the ground, paralyzed, and even maintained the posture she had when she was shooting. Did you see that? And took a deep breath and said to Amanda, You killed a vampire? You did it. You did it with me. It wasn't as difficult as you imagined. Amanda reacted to Anne's words and raised her head subconsciously, and looked at her and smiled. You're much braver than I was just now. We're still alive. That's... Amanda's lips moved, and she mumbled, That's the voice, my goddess, and felt a sudden warmth from the ring in her hand. The gem that had completely dimmed began to light up a little, but this time it was only slightly red. This warmth seemed to be some kind of stimulation, and suddenly shivered and subconsciously looked at the other women except Amanda. She found that their gazes began to change. "Stand up," and blurted out. She didn't even think about what she was going to say next. She just blurted out, "Stand up. I'll give you weapons. Follow me. I'll take you out." She gritted her teeth and waved her hand with the ring. Instantly, dozens of weapons were thrown out from the ground. "Pick them up and follow me. I'll take you out." "Are the vampires scary?" "Scary. I didn't even have the courage to resist. So I died. I died once. Then I killed them. And there were two of them. So stand up. Follow me. I'll take you out. Stand up. Stand up." Amanda stood up, holding the gun in her hand tightly, like a seedling breaking out of the soil. She stood up. Behind Amanda, a woman's gaze suddenly became clear. She stood up from the chair, but because she hadn't exercised for a long time, she fell to the ground after standing up. But she didn't give up. She struggled, struggling hard. Amanda walked over and helped her up. God! A stronger warmth began to flow from the ring into Anne's body. She felt like she was wrapped in warm water. The reddish gem began to change colors. One woman after another stood up from the chair that had once swallowed their lives. God! And even heard many voices like the inner thoughts of these women. Maybe it was just her imagination. But she could do it this time, right? It was no longer a delusion, but a real action. And looked at these women who stood up again and surrounded her. She smiled, "Follow me. I'll take you out of here." God! That was their silent inner thoughts. Their faith in her. God! Great sound. Farm. Looking at the street of Farm, Boss Luo put his hand beside his ear, listening to what the wind blew. "Once the flame appears, it will keep burning," Luocio chuckled. "In the beginning, God appeared like this, Master." At this moment, Miss Maid's voice sounded in Boss Luo's ears. Miss Maid was still in the room of the villa, creating the background of the orcs after they entered the game world. She was writing about the evil dragon from the far east who was besieged by the angry orcs. "What's the matter?" Luocio asked in his mind. "Nothing. I suddenly felt a trace of divinity being born, but it's very weak." Miss Maid's voice was a little uncertain. "Is it Master's work?" "It's an accident, but sometimes it's a pleasant surprise." Boss Luo smiled. "I don't know if this surprise will last forever. I should go back after a while. Before Master comes back, I'll finish writing the background information of the orcs." Luocio smiled. "The story of the evil dragon." "A little bit." Miss Maid's voice sounded a little playful. Boss Luo smiled, and then temporarily cut off the communication with Miss Maid. He looked at David and Meilu, who happened to arrive at one of the entrances of the sewer that led to Mating Farm. His eyes started to become expectant. "I don't know if there are any more surprises." Chapter 1398. She turned her body and slowly opened her eyes. While feeling the softness of the mattress, she also saw Sister Long sitting on the chair beside the bed, looking at her with her chin resting on her hand. "Sister Long, good morning." She yawned and greeted at the same time. Shinryu of Kelowna rolled his eyes. "It's not dawn yet. Go back to sleep if you're sleepy." "Well, okay." Luo Dance yawned, and then turned her body in the quilt. It was so comfortable. She continued to sleep. She thought like this. As she thought about it, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She opened her eyes abruptly, then lifted the blanket and sat up. Sister Long." Shinryu of Kelowna sneered. "You woke up this time?" "Yes, I woke up." "Go back to sleep." "Why didn't you sleep?" The butterfly monster pursed her lips, shaking her head with cold sweat, but it seemed to be useless. She lowered her head and bumped in along Shirua's arms, hugging her waist tightly, crying, "I'm sorry, Sister Long, I don't know how I fell asleep. I clearly remember that I wanted to lead Sister Yu away, as you said, but I don't know why I suddenly fell asleep." Long Shirua looked at this butterfly monster angrily. God knew where she learned this trick. She raised her hand and wanted to knock on her head, but she didn't want to do it. Instead, she gently stroked her head. Shinryu of Kelowna said angrily, "You read so many books, but you're not smart at all. Be more careful in the future. What kind of place is this? How can you fall asleep so easily?" "Well, Although Luo Dance fell asleep because of herself, she didn't want to say it out. Shinryu's majesty, as the head of the family, should be reflected in this way. She had to rebuild the great image in Butterfly Monster's heart. Yes, Butterfly Monster nodded and looked up at Long Shiro. She blinked and asked, Sister Long, did you secretly find the boss to do something bad? Puff. In fact, there was no image to speak of. Kelowna's Shinryu's face was still full of words. The words written by Miss Maid were still there. Oh, I thought about it, Kelowna's Shinryu said indifferently. I don't think I can forgive you so easily. The old man said, You'll learn from the pain. Huh? The old man said that one would learn to speak after being hurt. It was unknown whether the old man was right. The little butterfly monster who was lying on the bed with her, but up would definitely not want to experience what had just happened again. Beside her, Kelowna's Shinryu flicked her hair and said with arms akimbo, Well, get up, don't stay here. I feel like something happened. Luo Dance quickly got up and asked confusedly, Did something happen? Long Shua shook her head, and a trace of doubt flashed in her eyes. I felt like something suddenly appeared just a moment ago. Something not so good, very similar to some guys. Some guys? Luo Dance blinked, feeling that Sister Long's expression was somewhat strange or dignified. Long Shua said expressionlessly, Some guys who left, boring guys. Forget it, you won't know even if I tell you. I probably won't have a chance to meet them in the future. Luo Dance was well-behaved because she would never ask such questions. She got up and rubbed the place that was ravaged. Her head, Sister Long, what should we do now? Long Shua murmured, I'm a bit worried about Hui Yao. I don't know what he is doing now. Luo Dance was stunned and then understood. Mr. Hui Yao said that he had left to deal with something alone for some time, but he hadn't come back yet. Mr. Hui Yao, can't you find this place? Kelowna's Shinryu rolled her eyes and said grumpily, Go and see the girl I brought back and see how she is now. The little butterfly monster nodded and trotted out of the room. Long Shiro opened the curtains of the room and looked outside, although she was still concerned about Hui Yao. Well, should I ask Luo? Profiteer? Anyway, the information channel has been opened. If it's just a little inquiry, speaking of which, why didn't he respond now? Was it because he hadn't called out to her in his heart? Should she give it a try? Long Shiro looked at her reflection in the glass. She suddenly pulled the curtains. Go to hell. You make me feel like a man all the time. Shaking her head, Long Shiro patted her cheeks with both hands. As the first Tower Master, Hui Yao couldn't find anything in this inhuman space that could baffle him, except for that pair of master and servant. Therefore, compared to Hui Yao's delayed arrival, Long Shiro was actually more concerned about another thing, the thing that she and Luo Dance felt like something had appeared. What's the matter? Kelowna's Shinryu muttered to herself. Why do I feel that the path of incense god has appeared in this place? After a while, Kelowna's Shinryu couldn't hold it in anymore. She then cleared her throat and stared at the air for a while, before swallowing her saliva. Hey, well, it's a bit impolite. She cleared her throat again and lowered her voice. Are you there? Shouldn't I call your name first? Who are you calling like that? She cleared her throat again and coughed twice. Her voice was so sweet that it could drown people. Are you there? I have something to ask you. This time, even Kelowna's Shinryu was disgusted by herself and scratched her hair. Once Kelowna's Shinryu was irritated, she spoke in her mind with an unhappy voice. Telepathy. Profiteer, tell me the information about Hui Yao. It's over. Long Shua regretted it as soon as she roared this in her heart. She waited for a moment, wondering if Luochio didn't respond because he didn't like her attitude. She couldn't help but feel annoyed. However, a piece of information was suddenly injected into her mind. It was information about Hui Yao. According to the information, Hui Yao was not in any danger at this time. He was just doing something that was hard to come by. As for what kind of rare thing it was, the information did not mention it in detail. Long Shirua felt that if she wanted to know what kind of opportunity it was, she should be able to find it out by chance. However, she thought about it and decided not to. As the saying went, everyone has their own fate. She couldn't force it. Although she was only a disciple, she still hoped that Hui Yao could become more outstanding from the bottom of her heart. Speaking of which, Long Shuo licked her lips at this time. The so-called information channel is actually this kind of automatic mechanism. It wasn't always Boss Luo's real body that answered. It was just that there was a kind of mode where she would pay first and then pay after a period of time. In this case, Long Shuo blinked her eyes. Her heart suddenly jumped a few times. Then, she looked around guiltily. She quickly locked the door of the room to prevent a certain big-breasted but brainless butterfly from suddenly barging in. She still felt a little uneasy, so she consecutively set up more than 10 barriers around her. After that, Kelowna's Shinryu looked at the ceiling and glanced around. What kind of food does that guy like to eat? Does that guy really like short-hair girls? Foot size? It was as if she heard the voice of the mysterious information channel itself. It's not supposed to be used like this. David followed Meow Meow's footsteps and stopped at one of the sewers without much thrill. At this time, Meow Meow raised her palm slightly and signaled him not to stop. Meg Ming turned around and gestured for him to keep quiet. David understood and nodded. Then, he saw Meow Meow suddenly rushed out of the alley. David's pupils slightly contracted. Meow Meow Meow's agility was even faster than when he held the Tang Dao that he traded. What exactly did she sell in exchange for such an ability? David restrained himself and silently watched Meow Meow's every move after rushing out of the alley. At this time, Meow Meow rushed towards a few patrolling inspectors. They were not patrolling guards. Perhaps the inspectors had also received the same order and were also searching for the vampire killer in the farm. Only one of them was a real vampire, while the other two were adult descendants of the ancients who had become inspectors. A male and a female. Flame. Black flame. David once again saw the magical power of Meow Meow. The flame was silent like a flowing breeze. It didn't even have the slightest bit of heat, and it easily blew to the side of the inspectors. Although it didn't have any heat, after it attached itself to the vampire, it went crazy in an instant. It directly swallowed the vampire in an extremely terrifying speed. The intensity of the black flames that engulfed the vampire was so great that the two human inspectorate members at the side were instantly shocked to the point that their eyes turned dull. Only when the vampire was completely burned, leaving only some clothes and the vampire's original weapon on the ground, did the man and woman wake up with a start. Among them, the male member of the inspectorate took out something from his waist in a panic. It was something like a signal flare. He raised the signal flare with trembling hands. Just when he was about to pull the flare, Meow had already rushed in front of him and hit the man's abdomen with her knee, knocking him down to the ground. After all, he was just an adult human who had submitted himself to her, and he hadn't even undergone any transformation. An ordinary person's body naturally couldn't withstand such a heavy blow. The man suddenly squatted down while holding his abdomen in pain. The female inspector next to him screamed and pulled out the long sword at her waist in a panic. If you don't want to end up like this vampire, shut up. At this time, Meow waved her hand, and a black flame jumped directly in her palm. The man and woman of the inspector were so frightened that they hurriedly stopped all their voices. The aristocrat. No, the vampire was burned to ashes in front of their eyes just like that. Such a powerful vampire was killed so easily. The two of them didn't dare to resist. It was as if obedience was something that they were born with. Meow saw the thing called slavery in the eyes of the two people. She sighed in her heart. How many people, after knowing the truth, can get rid of this thing that has been formed since the beginning of their lives? This was not simply something that had been formed since the birth of a child. This was something that had been passed down generation after generation in the farm for thousands of years. It borrowed the blood of humans from generation to generation, and like a certain gene, it was deeply embedded in the blood before the child was born. Just like how living things evolved with the change of environment, so that the later generations could better adapt to the changes of a new environment. just like how a great biologist's theory of evolution could be applied to the innate slavery of the descendants of the ancient species in the farm. At this time, David quickly walked to Vela's side. Although he didn't know why Meow Meow didn't directly kill the two inspectors, but since she had already subdued them, David didn't say anything. First, tie these two people up and bring them along. Meow Meow looked at David and said directly, "This is like an order." David was quite unhappy in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he nodded obediently. "I'm the commander of the Revolutionary Army this time." He quickly tied up the two inspectors and even used cloth balls to stuff their mouths. He was very careful. David looked at Meow Meow and asked, "You plan to bring them along? But won't this cause trouble?" Meow Meow frowned and looked at David. "They are just like us. They are also humans. When did the Revolutionary Army learn to despise their own kind?" David's heart suddenly jumped, but his face was still expressionless. Instead, he looked like he was deep in thought. "No, if there is no way to truly defeat the vampires and liberate all of our kind, there is nothing we can do to change them." Looking at Meow Meow's attentive expression, David said slowly, "So what if we bring them along? What can we do to persuade them to join us? But we don't know if they are as determined as us, if they have the same determination to save their own kind. So," David took a deep breath and said sincerely, "I would rather they stay with the vampires, at least this way. At least they can still live, even if their will is not strong enough." Meow Meow's gaze slowly changed. It seemed to be gentler. At this time, David laughed bitterly. "Is this thinking of mine too naive?" Meow Meow said, "I don't plan to bring them along, but if we bring them along, they might be of use. Don't worry, I won't let you be in danger." "That's not what I meant." David shook his head, and at the same time, he was secretly relieved. Chapter 1399. There was no sun or moon in the inhuman domain, but the transition between light and darkness was still as punctual as day and night. Busby had never seen the real moon. He was a vampire who had never left the inhuman domain and went to the main world. Therefore, he didn't know what the real moon looked like. After hearing the description of the moon by the vampires who often traveled between the real world and the inhuman domain, Busby had once yearned for it. He flew above the farm, town, and looked up at the dark sky. The night sky, without stars and moon, was like a black cloth. In the inhuman domain, if there was no light, it would be absolute darkness. There was no such thing as moonlight or starlight, but on the other hand, any weak light on the ground would be very obvious. If there was enough light, there might be a galaxy on the ground. Who said that? He lowered his head and silently looked at the farm below. At the same time, the muscles on his back began to move slowly. A pair of new bat wings began to expand little by little like a flower bud. The new bat wings quickly turned from weak to strong. Then, with a strong flap, Busby's body rose up a little more. Then, he flipped over and glided, drawing a beautiful arc in the air and falling into the farm. The killer, he found it. After this is over, should I take Mina to see the real world? He suddenly had this idea. Mine David had successfully entered the sewer. From the beginning, the sewer was built for some unknown reason. Maybe it was because of the Torito clan's innate pursuit of aesthetics. But the sewer was very spacious and complicated. It was as complicated as a maze. The captured man and woman were blindfolded at this time, and their hands were tied. Then they were dragged by a rope and staggered forward. Mai was at the back, waiting to see what the pair would do. David didn't talk to Mai too much here, although he was very eager to know what kind of deal Mai had made. He wanted to ask about it indirectly, and at the same time, he didn't want to tell Mai that he also had some magical things in his hands. At the same time, he didn't want to mention anything about the deal in front of the pair, so he could only keep silent. But silence didn't mean that David didn't intend to do anything. Speaking of which, if we had been able to use this sewer in the beginning, it might have been more advantageous for us. He turned around and looked at Mai. In fact, as the commander of this operation, he didn't even know about the existence of this huge sewer. As for Mai, she obviously didn't share this information. Mai, David, have you ever thought about why all of our companions were captured? And right when we were about to take action, such a coincidence? Suddenly, some of the conversations in the stable flashed through David's mind. The initial conclusion of the discussion was that the mysterious companion who acted as the helper in the farm might have betrayed them, resulting in the failure of the mission. But now that they thought about it, if there was no way to confirm the reliability of the secret helper in the farm, the leader would never have agreed to this mission. Throughout history, there had never been a problem with the receivers from different farms. So why did it have to be this time? Could it be that the problem was not caused by a spy, but one of their own? Once he thought of this, David's breathing slowed down a little. Among so many people, who was the most likely to be the culprit? May? Did she really obtain this power because she made a deal, or did she obtain it from somewhere else? But if it was her, then there was no need for her to rescue them from the dungeon. David could only eliminate the possibility of May being the culprit. This time, there were a total of 4 people who escaped during the chaos. 2 of them died in the stable, so it shouldn't be her. The other 2 were May and Martin from the farm. May and Martin had a very good relationship. May seemed to have been traumatized by something, causing her personality to change drastically. While Martin was dead, David still didn't know what happened. Regarding the sewer, I have already told Ma Lu about it. May didn't think too much about it and explained directly. After she studied it, she didn't accept the suggestion of using the sewer. Ma Lu. David's eyes flashed with a strange light. Because of this name, he had a different look in his eyes. This was the woman who came to his aid when he was at his most desperate. Hey, are you okay? If you can't find a reason to live, why don't you try to live for me? Time is here. David took a deep breath and tossed away the messy thoughts in his mind. He suddenly couldn't find the reason why he was so desperate. In fact, he even had a vague feeling that it was funny that he was desperate. That's right. May nodded. Even though this sewer leads to everywhere and it is easy to get to every part of the farm, but on the other hand, the vampires are very strict with their inspection. So, this place is even more unsuitable for hiding and moving around. David didn't say anything because he saw a special device that looked like a patrol sign. In this kind of enclosed place, it was too easy to make noise when moving around. But if that was the case, David had a feeling that the vampires would be able to find this place much faster. It was impossible that they didn't realize that the people they wanted to capture could be hiding in this complicated underground maze. Wait for me here. Keep an eye on these 2 people. May suddenly said, remember, don't leave. Unless there are vampires nearby. I'll be back soon. Where are you going? David couldn't help but frown. But May didn't respond. She seemed to be in a hurry. Soon, she climbed up the stairs from the side. David frowned again. Perhaps he could follow her quietly and see what she was going to do. But he couldn't be sure if May had any other sensing ability. David was silent for a moment, and then suddenly set his eyes on the 2 people in front of him. He turned his eyes and walked to the man and asked in a low voice, "What's your name?" He took out the claw from the man's mouth. Roy. The man said his name with a trembling voice. David glanced sideways at this moment and suddenly lowered his voice. Take off your clothes, right now. Roy's body suddenly stiffened. He vaguely knew what the guy who held him hostage was planning. However, under the threat of David's sharp tang sword on his neck, he had no choice but to do as he was told. May quickly climbed out of the manhole. She had to do this. The black flame burning on her cheeks was like a hungry beast that couldn't be satisfied no matter what. It began to want to devour the target of revenge, and it was getting stronger and stronger. The faster the power gained, the bigger the flaw. This black flame perfectly explained this saying. May took a deep breath of the cold wind on the street. She felt the excitement of the black flame in her body. In front of her, there were a lot of things that it wanted to devour, those vampires. At this moment, what appeared before May's eyes was a rather magnificent palace building. This building couldn't help but evoke some unpleasant memories in May. She, as a kind of character setting in the farm, used to live in this building with several boys and girls of the same type. The black flame on her cheeks suddenly became stronger. May directly walked into the palace building. The inside was brightly lit with shadows swaying. It seemed that there were many vampires here, and they were powerful vampires. It seemed that those patrol members couldn't compare with them. For May, This should be a more dangerous place. But, driven by the black flame, she seemed to be the tool of revenge. Who? The two vampires guarding the entrance immediately shouted for them to stop, but what responded to them was a strange and inexorable black flame. The black flame directly shot into their mouths, and then directly entered their bodies, devouring them from the inside out. May felt the power of the black flame in her body suddenly became stronger, and her eyes naturally flashed with murderous light. What she didn't know was that this palace was actually the temporary residence of the entire Tordo clan's upper nobles. In the palace, a marquis who was looking forward to the appearance of the vampire killer didn't know what kind of power this vampire killer had. Inside the palace, the upper nobles were still discussing whether they should wake up the Grand Duke to punish Baesby and Balegan. How about a plate of blood salad first? A noble who was keen on eating made a suggestion, and soon, most of the nobles agreed. Oh, go and open my private freezer. A forthright noble stood up and spread out his hands. I'd like to present a precious gift to my beloved friends. His words quickly gathered the attention of most of the nobles. He smiled and said, I think you will like the taste of my collection. They are all the things that were frozen on Krop's 18th birthday. Their beliefs have collapsed, and their blood has become very chaotic. But I have kept it in cold storage. As long as they are slightly thawed, you will be able to taste the mixture of chaos and purity. I heard that it feels like a human drinking a bottle of strong alcohol. I don't know how alcohol tastes to humans, but I can tell you that this feeling is really wonderful. His speech quickly received a warm applause. The nobles seemed to have forgotten the original topic and began to discuss the benefits of this frozen food. Their lives had always been here. They were never in tune, and there was no sense of tension. They had completely become trash that only knew how to enjoy. Marquis Gouda coldly looked at most of the nobles around him. Even if they didn't participate in the discussion, they were doing other things. They didn't care about Marquis Gouda's suggestion to wake up the Grand Duke. Marquis Gouda sneered and silently counted the time in his heart, waiting for the surprise arranged by his confidant to arrive. It should be about time, right? To give these trash that only knew how to enjoy stimulation. This palace looked very strange. What made May puzzled was that she didn't encounter any patrolling personnel or fixed guards along the way. Yes, there were all these, but the problem was whether it was patrolling vampires or standing guard vampires. There were very few of them. Was it because they were all transferred to capture her? But no matter what, it greatly facilitated her actions. She didn't even need to make a big fuss, and she could easily use the flame to devour these isolated vampires. She strengthened the power of the flame bit by bit. She didn't stop all the way, and the power of the black flame had been strengthened to far beyond the previous fierce battle in the square. But it still didn't have any intention of stopping. It only slightly restrained the feeling of hunger that passed to her. Suddenly, a group of vampires dressed in the uniforms of the patrol team came in unison. This group of vampires wore the uniforms of the patrol team. Their faces were cold, and their movements were neat. They strode forward aggressively. But what made May puzzled was that this group of patrolling guards didn't seem to be coming for her. But she could go straight for them. If she could successfully devour this group of guards completely, May had a vague feeling that the black flame in her body seemed to have some new changes. She quietly followed like a ghost. At this time, the black flame covered her body with a layer of black, gauze-like substance, isolating the sound of her movements and even the sound of her breathing. She was a true ghost. Roy's stomach was churning. After being forced to take off the uniform of the inspection team, he was forced by David to put on the stinky clothes that David took off. David changed into Roy's uniform at this time and even replaced his tang sword with the weapon of the inspection team, hanging it on his waist openly. He looked at his current attire with satisfaction. But at this moment, the sound of footsteps faintly came from the sewer. David's eyes suddenly narrowed. May said to wait here for her to come back, but she hasn't come back yet. Then, chapter 1400. David was not the only one who heard the sound. Apparently, Roy and another female member of the inspection team also heard the approaching sound at this moment. The two people who were being held hostage were obviously looking for an opportunity to send out a distress signal. However, they did not dare to move because they were currently being held hostage. As the 6 pairs of eyes met, David could clearly hear the breathing of the 2 men gradually becoming heavier. At this moment, Roy suddenly quivered. He opened his mouth as if he was about to shout. David's pupils shrank. Without any hesitation, he pounced directly on Roy. He did not choose to use any knife because blood would only make the vampire discover him earlier. He just used his arm to strangle Roy's neck while covering his mouth with his palm and exerting his strength crazily. Roy's legs kept kicking on the ground, and his face became extremely ugly due to suffocation. It was his last struggle before death. David's gaze was fierce at this moment. While strangling Roy's neck, his eyes were only staring at the passage ahead. He even kept making shoo in Roy's ear, telling him to be quiet. Shh. Luo, he finally stopped moving, and his legs stopped moving. There was no longer any resistance, and his body was completely relaxed, soft. But David did not let go and still held him tightly. It was not until a while later that he was sure Roy was really not breathing that he let go of his arm. On the side, the female member of the inspection team was so scared that she did not dare to move. At the same time, the footsteps in the distance began to become clearer. David suddenly stood up and pulled out the tang sword at his waist. The sharp tip of the sword gently poked the throat of the female member of the inspection team. Almost at the same time, a voice came from the sewer passage. There seems to be something over there. Go take a look. Hearing the voice, the female member of the inspection team suddenly widened her eyes. She could feel the sharpness of the tip of the sword at her throat, but her mouth was gagged, and she could not say anything for help. Her heart was about to jump out. She even saw the madness in David's eyes. Finally, David raised the tang sword in his hand and swung it down at an extremely fast speed. 2 guards from the patrol team were patrolling the area. When they heard the sound, they immediately sped up. However, when they suddenly smelled the smell of blood, they spread their wings and began to shuttle through the sewers. It didn't take long for the 2 vampires to arrive at the place where the bloody smell came from. Here, they saw a corpse lying on the edge of the water tank. Blood had already flowed into the water tank, and half of the corpse's body had also entered the water tank. Beside him was a man and a woman from the inspectorate team. The woman was currently lying in the arms of the man, seemingly unconscious. What happened here? One of the patrolling guards frowned. Hearing this, the male member of the inspection team raised his head. His expression was so respectful that it was almost humble. Masters, we received a notice saying that we were searching for a criminal. Then, we were arranged to go to the sewers. This person, we met him here. He seems to be a fugitive hiding here. As he spoke, he observed the expressions of the 2 vampires. He didn't let himself become completely calm, but with a trace of awe and fear. Those who knew the truth would always feel fear when facing vampires. Fear. Only fear would prevent vampires from feeling discordant. Did you kill him? The other vampire asked indifferently. He nodded yes, because he was resisting and sneakily attacked. My companion was hit because of this. I had no choice but to stop when I was entangled. I'm really sorry. The vampire walked to the side of the corpse and flipped it over with a weapon. He casually glanced at the dirty face of the corpse. The corpse's heart was constantly bleeding, and it was still fresh. But for this, the 2 vampires didn't have any interest, because the corpse was too dirty to arouse their appetite. This should be one of the people of the Revolutionary Army who escaped in the chaos in the first half of the night. They quickly made a judgment. It's fine if he's dead. Anyway, there's nothing to pity. You, what's your name? He quickly said, Masters, my name is Luo. I'm the 7th team of the inspection team. Enough. Say no more. Before Roy finished his words, he was directly interrupted. The 2 guards of the patrol team were obviously not interested in knowing the origin of this human who didn't resist after knowing the truth, but chose to submit to slavery. The vampire who interrupted Roy's words said directly at this time, You take this woman and this corpse back immediately. Once we confirm the identity of this corpse, let's do what we need to do. Roy quickly nodded and said yes. Then he quickly stood up, came to the corpse, grabbed the clothes of the corpse, and began to drag it. Facing the stench of the corpse's clothes, Roy even made a retching action at this moment, but he braced himself and had to do it. He quickly dragged the corpse out of the sink under the gaze of the two vampires, then quickly carried the fainted woman on his back and said humbly, "I'll take the corpse back now. Masters, any other messages? Do you want me to bring back?" "No, let's go," a vampire said casually. The other vampire was looking around the sewer, seemingly trying to discern something. Roy nodded silently at this moment. Then he carried the woman on his back and dragged the corpse, struggling to leave from their sight. "Wait a minute." But after walking for a few meters, the vampire's voice sounded again. Roy's pupils constricted slightly, but he did not hesitate at all. He quickly turned around and showed a flattering expression. "Is there anything else, my lords?" One of the vampires suddenly threw out something. It was a silver badge with a number engraved on it. This silver badge rolled to Roy's feet. He didn't know what it was for a while, but he quickly picked it up. The vampire who threw the badge said indifferently, "Next time you go to the blood station to donate blood, show this to the station head. The station head will know to give you more rewards. Take it as a reward for killing the fugitive this time." Even if they became members of the inspection team, they still had the obligation to provide blood to the clan regularly. After all, they were still descendants of the ancients, and their blood was much cleaner than that of humans in this world. The adult ancients' descendants were just no longer welcomed by the superior nobles, but they were still very expensive food for the low-level vampires in the clan. Roy hurriedly held the silver badge in his hand gratefully and almost knelt down to kowtow. "Thank you, master. Thank you, master. Thank you, master." "Okay, get out." The vampire waved his hand. He had seen too many of the human beings in the inspection team groveling and groveling in daily life. Roy picked up the corpse's clothes again, carried the woman on his back, and slowly walked out of the sight of the two vampires. He didn't walk too fast to avoid arousing the suspicion of the two vampires. It wasn't until he vaguely heard some of the conversation between the two vampires and finally heard them leave that he continued to walk for a distance before finally stopping. Letting go of the corpse, David threw the woman on his back directly to the ground. "I know you're awake. Stop pretending." David coldly stared at the woman lying motionless on the ground, but the woman still didn't move. David sneered and casually pressed the scabbard against the woman's cheek. Then he pried open her mouth. The woman hurriedly opened her eyes and begged for mercy. "When did you wake up?" David asked directly. The woman didn't dare to hesitate and quickly said, "Not long ago." David glanced at her and suddenly said, "Not long ago? Was it when the two vampires were still there? Why didn't you ask for help? You clearly had a chance to escape from danger and even let the vampires catch me." "Yes, that's right." Facing David's scabbard on her cheek, the woman was still afraid, and her voice trembled slightly. But I can't be sure if you would hurt me first even if I exposed you. It's too dangerous," David said indifferently. "Then you can be sure that I won't hurt you after I deceive them." At the same time, he glanced at the corpse on the ground. The corpse was the real Roy. His meaning was very clear. Since he could kill Roy, he could naturally kill her. The same trick can't be used twice. The woman's voice was still very low, like a student facing the teacher's question in class, but was not confident. Her voice still had a trace of fava beans in it. "And even if you do it again, you killing me won't help." David didn't speak, just snorted softly. The woman raised her head. At this time, there were no restraints on her body, and she completely had the ability to resist, but she chose not to move. "Actually, I'm quite familiar with the environment of the farm." "What do you want to say?" David squatted down and looked straight into her eyes. The woman swallowed her saliva. "I want to escape from this place." "You want to?" David couldn't help but frown. The woman quickly nodded. "You should be from the Revolutionary Army, right?" Although the clan has always banned the news of the Revolutionary Army from spreading, we have heard about it more or less. Rumor has it that you opened up a shelter for humans in the inhuman territory, where humans can live normally, just like us in the past. "You want to go?" "I want to go." The woman said urgently. I've always wanted to go. I've even been looking for an opportunity. Here, the farm. I'm afraid we can't stay any longer. The nobles, I heard that they plan to remove the inspection team, and they won't even use adults after submitting to them in the future. After the children in the farm reach adulthood, all of them will be sent directly to the mating farm and will maybe sent directly to this slaughterhouse. Because I heard that the harvest of the major farms is not very good these years. The clans have to start to save some unnecessary expenses and to maximize the exploitation. David sneered. The woman lowered her head sadly and didn't deny it. More or less like her, she sold everything she could after reaching adulthood and finally became a slave of the vampire. Although she became a slave and didn't need to be sent to the farm with other functions, she still could only let the vampire dominate her life. You follow me. Aren't you afraid that I will suddenly kill you on the way? David asked suddenly. The woman gritted her teeth and said, You won't. If I have value, you won't. Because I know that you don't have justice on the surface. You are a selfish and cold guy. As long as there is benefit, you won't refuse. What did you say? David looked at her expressionlessly. He was really expressionless. The woman said quickly, You killed Roy, didn't you? What can this prove? David sneered. The woman said, But you didn't use such a tone in front of that woman. You said those beautiful words in front of her. Did you forget it so quickly? But I heard it. Roy also heard it. The difference is that Roy is already dead after you said those beautiful words. David looked at her without saying a word. His palm pressed on the handle of the Tang saber, and his fingers gently tapped. The woman's breathing began to become heavier, obviously more and more nervous. Suddenly, You have no value. David said indifferently, This is what you said. The same trick, it's not good to use it a second time. The woman quickly said, I know your plan. You want to sneak into the mating farm, through the sewers and wait until dawn to find a chance to leave, right? But I can tell you with certainty that there are nobles in the channel to enter the mating farm. Do you think they didn't think that there will be children of the farm, or people like us who will secretly use these sewers? David himself also considered this problem. Perhaps the leader of the Revolutionary Army didn't accept my suggestion on the use of the sewers because of this consideration. Can I pass through with you? The woman hurriedly said, At least I have a pass. I don't need to go through the sewers, but I can pass through the checkpoint openly. Oh, so you have a pass on you. David smiled. The woman's face slightly changed, but she was still calm. Even if you have a pass, if you encounter any special situation on the road, do you have the confidence to deal with it? You have to remember, you are not the real Roy. But I have lived here for a long time. I can even call out the name of the guard at the checkpoint. You will need me. Are you not afraid that I will suddenly give up on you? David said indifferently, You know, we don't have much confidence to leave safely. If you follow us, the possibility of failure will be higher. But on the contrary, if you stay, you can still live for a while. Maybe the vampires will suddenly change their mind and not withdraw you guys who have surrendered. The woman looked at David at this time and smiled. You are saying such nice words again, aren't you? David suddenly chuckled, took back the Tang sword, and said indifferently, What is your name? Renas. Remember, David said expressionlessly, As long as you have any intention to go behind me, I will not hesitate. Woman, Renas felt the ruthlessness in David's eyes and nodded subconsciously.